We are, and Brexit, of course, it is
Happy Brexit Day.
Happy Brexit Day.
Where's the cake?
It is 5 years. A big cake out there. Someone's going to jump out of it. I think Julia, possibly.
Julia.
Yeah, she might.
Have you seen The Sun? She's obviously her column resplendent in her Jerry Halliwell dress.
Absolutely
with
right.
The Union Jack.
Yeah, she looks fabulous. I always remember that.
It's a sight and a half.
Yeah, it is a sight and a half.
It really is.
But it's 5 years, you know, and the same arguments are being made. I think, by the way, slightly too premature to work out. I think you need another 5 years.
Well, let's see.
We will see.
OK, well, look, thank you for your company. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Hope you have as well. I'm Russell Quirk. Ian Collins next. I'll be back at some point in the future.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the home of Common Sense. Lots to get through here this afternoon on the programme. Exactly 5 years, as you've been hearing, since the UK left the EU. Prime Minister Keir Starmer refusing to mark the occasion, while Nigel Farage has vowed to deliver the Brexit that 17.4 million people voted for if he becomes the Prime Minister. So far, he says, that ain't happened. Has it been a success? Has it been a success for you? I want to gauge your opinion on this, whether you were a Remainer who crossed the line and has now become an ardent supporter of us not being in it. Our lines are open now. Also this afternoon, every £1 in every 15 spent on benefits last year was fraudulently claimed or paid by mistake. This is according to a report by the Department for Work and Pensions. That works out to about £10 billion, by the way. You can't make this stuff up. And Donald Trump, as you've been hearing, has blamed diversity hiring sprees for causing the deadly crash between a military helicopter and a passenger plane that killed 67 people in Washington, D.C. yesterday. We'll have details on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Lots to get through. Has Brexit been a success? How do we judge if Brexit has been a success? Look, I've said this constantly, and interestingly, and I stand to be educated as to why, but I rarely hear others make this point firmly enough. Even those who campaigned vigorously for Brexit don't often give the rather simple analysis when it comes to the big question, was leaving the EU the right thing to do? And my answer is this: it's too soon to tell. It's almost that simple. It's too soon to tell. I made this point constantly in the lead up to this, before we even went to the ballot box to vote. This is a move that will take, I would argue, at least 10 years to decide if Brexit has worked. And we're now only halfway through that. We are 5 years in. There are some clues, I would argue, that give us a scintilla of information about how well it may or may not be going. 0344 499 1000. And when you look, one of the great things about working here on Talk, which you don't get in many, if any, other places, is that we have an incredibly forensic and well-informed audience on these kind of issues. People often talk about everyone's an armchair general or an armchair prime minister. I think on stuff like this, certainly our audience on afternoons here at the home of common sense are always very good at doing their homework. You know, you've read up on this stuff, you've looked across all angles of the story and concluded X, Y and Z. And that's why this question, I think, is a pretty ripe one for our audience. Has it been a success? And what would you judge it by? I think there's a couple of it. I mean, the big areas are trade, immigration, travel, laws, and of course, money. And on the last point, it is worth, and I think this is, again, something I don't hear talked about often enough, frankly. I know it's not the only answer, but I think it's a pretty powerful one. We used to pay, do you remember what we used to pay to the EU on an annual basis? £18.3 billion. That's £18.3 billion. 352 million a week. Remember the bus. For fans of pedantry, by the way, it was a coach, but you take the point. Now, some of that we used to get back in terms of things like farming and development grants. But if you crunch the numbers, the net fiscal benefit to the UK from not paying in to the EU budget, from not paying in, is around about 9 billion a year. Now, I would say that's a good day at the office, wouldn't you? 9 billion quid a year. We are better off. I know it's not the full story, I get that. Financially, just based on the money we used to give, 18.3 billion. You think of all the countries, all 29 countries that were giving those kind of amounts of money. And you are forced, I think you'd be forced in any other world, when you go, what do we get for that? So we get 18 billion, we get some of it back that went to agriculture and farming and areas that were in need of assistance and levelling up and all the rest of it. But, you know, broadly speaking, the EU kept most of that. What do they do with that stuff? And they did have two parliaments with about 20 trillion people working in them. It was a massive bureaucracy in that respect. So I would say if we're 9 billion better off not being in it, okay, about 9 billion. Now that on its own, I would say, is a good starting point. So all things are looking rather good at this point. In terms of taxation, there's all sorts of things, many things you might not have even clocked. We don't pay tax on sanitary ware in this country, but we do pay VAT on private schools. So no VAT on tampons, but VAT on private schools. Both of those decisions, by the way, were only possible as a result of leaving the EU. There is a sanitary tax of 5% in EU countries, and it is illegal to tax or put VAT on education, even if it's private. So both of those things happen as a result of not being in the EU. Make of that what you will. I want the wider question answered if we can. 0344 499 1000. Has Brexit been a success? We make our own laws. I think that's the obvious one that we would look at. And, you know, it's interesting because the supposed kind of catch-you-out answer or catch-you-out question that comes from the Remaining lobby is always which laws have made this country better since leaving the EU? Which laws have made your life better since leaving the EU? And then you're sort of forced into this cul-de-sac of panic when you go, OK, hang on. Which law in particular is it that's made us better? And then, of course, the Remaining goes, you see, there ain't one, is there? No, that isn't the point. It's not which laws, it's who makes the laws. That's the point of Brexit. It's who makes the laws, even if it's the same law, even if it amounts to the same thing. You know, if speeding is illegal over 70 miles an hour in Portugal and Spain and France, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, all those kinds, doesn't matter. It's who makes the law. That's about democracy. And the most powerful argument for Brexit, to me, was always about democracy. And the last time I looked, there's nothing wrong with that. 0344 499 1000. Has Brexit been a success? Your analysis of the last 5 years, if you will. We'll take some calls on that shortly. Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Harrison Allman-Varty is with us, a Reform UK councillor in Elmbridge, the youngest on the planet, we think we can say now, Harrison. I don't think there's any Reform candidate anywhere on planet Earth that is younger than you. Would that be reasonable?
No, it's not. Every time I get on here, I'm getting younger. I mean, my title gets better and better as I get younger. No, there is some guy. I think he's called Kieran. He was 18 years old and won a by-election for Reform. So
get out of here.
Him.
Hang on. Can we lose Harrison and get Kieran on, please? That is outrageous that your light has been stolen by Kieran.
I've lost my USB.
You've lost your USB, but listen, but that's fine.
We're just another old councillor now.
Just another old git in the local council. That's what it is. Yeah. Let's have a listen then to some salient voices on this. Downing Street says the Prime Minister has no plans to mark 5 years since Britain left the EU. The Tories, of course, accusing Labour of plotting to dismantle Brexit. This is Keir Starmer discussing an EU reset when he joined Harry Cole on Never Mind the Ballots. Have a listen to this.
Are you about to betray Brexit?
No, we've been really clear from the get-go that this isn't about re-entry to the EU. It's not about going back to the old rules of the single market, the customs union, freedom of movement, etc. So we've been very clear about that. But within that, yes, we do want to reset. I want to make sure that we get a better deal for the British people, for your readers, so that they feel better off, they've got a better public services, and I think we can do that with a reset.
They can do it now with a reset. What does a reset look like, Harrison? And has Brexit been a success, firstly?
I think Brexit was success in democratic terms. There hasn't really been an exercise as successful as Brexit. People who don't normally turn out to vote felt as if they could that time. And you compare it to, for example, the general election we've just had, where turnout was historically low compared to Brexit. I think the more people that go out to vote, the healthier democracy. And in that instance, that was a good thing.
Yeah.
Regarding Keir Starmer, well, people shouldn't be too surprised. He wasn't particularly a Brexit fanatic. He was campaigning for the kind of in-out scenario under Corbyn, which I always thought was odd because Corbyn was kind of more of a leaver, but he never really embraced that. So I think for democracy it was good. Starmer is not a surprise. I think it'd be unusual if you would see him celebrating it because he's very eager to kind of heal things with the EU. But I don't think that's just immune to particularly to Labour, though. Theresa May was also, I think, in a very similar situation where she was a Remainer, didn't particularly believe in it, and constantly hedged for the EU. Sure. And that, you could argue, is why we never really got any sort of agreement with the US when Trump was in last time.
We had that curious time, didn't we, when it was Prime Minister's Question time. You had Jeremy Corbyn versus Theresa May. So Theresa May, a Remainer, arguing pro-Brexit, and Jeremy Corbyn was probably a leaver, but arguing against Brexit. I mean, it was just a sort of a mad upside-down period.
Absolutely. Look, there are some proven successes. Don't get me wrong. Leaving does not mean we will win automatically. Leaving means we've got more levers to pull of our own. That they can either be good or bad. I think some proven successes was obviously the stance in Ukraine. Now, people think that we maybe gone too much or too less on that. But one thing that is conclusive is that we have stood on the world stage as the UK. And we've come across as quite a large player and a leader in that, especially with Sleepy Joe. Boris Johnson, with a lot of his faults, did come across like he was in control of that situation. The vaccine rollout, that, like I said, some people might have some negative thoughts on that. But realistically, the reason why we were able to get so many vaccines so quickly was our independence and our independent buying power. And obviously that submarine deal that we did with, I think it was New Zealand and America and Australia.
That's right. Yeah, there was a collaboration of a deal.
That couldn't have been done within the EU. So look, there are successes, but leaving the EU doesn't mean default success. It just means we have more control to either make more failures or more success. And I don't think tying ourselves to an EU project which isn't particularly doing that well at the moment, I think we should look elsewhere to the likes of the US, which are really thriving.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, it's all very well saying, it's 5 years since Brexit, but of course, 3 of those, and we're still feeling the pain. The world locked down during that period. So I think it's really hard to gauge, particularly at the moment, where we might be, given that we had this, ludicrous set of lockdowns that scuppered everything from domestic issues to, international agreements. Everything was kind of put on hold. A bit of a pause button was set. Apparently, according to recent polls, most people would vote to rejoin. It's about 56%, which did surprise me because I don't know what that's based on.
That doesn't surprise me either. I actually very much can relate to people who kind of want to rejoin. Look, I'm in a rejoin area anyway, Remain area, I should say. So I do understand the sentiment because people have been promised that things will be good and they haven't been as good as they've turned out. So the natural reaction to that is, well, let's go back. So, but like I said, leaving does not determine success. It's the leadership you have. For example, I always thought Nigel Farage should have been the leader post-Brexit. Instead, we had political opportunists like Theresa May who saw it as an opportunity to be Prime Minister rather than what was actually within the national interest of to put someone who knew how it worked and who knew what to do to take advantage of leaving. Like I said, one of the big things that they should have done, sit down with the top finance bosses and say, what can we do? How can we make the UK better as we are now free from all the regulatory tape? What can make us the best as the centre of financial services? They do it.
Spot on. Let's move to this story. Around £10 billion in benefits was lost to fraud and errors last year. Now, that's 6.7% of the total bill. This is absolutely enormous. £1 in every 15. This is according to the Public Accounts Committee report. Let's have a listen to this clip. It's always interesting to replay this. This was Fraser Nelson's documentary that he did for Channel 4, interestingly, on Britain's benefits scandal. It features a man explaining here how he earns more money by not going to work.
So you're working part-time now and you're getting long-term sickness benefits. So what's the combination of those two compared to when you were working full-time with no benefits?
It's no different. So I'm probably working half the hours for the same money.
Right. So there's no financial incentive for you to get out of a situation at all?
None at all. None at all.
So why are you here? Why are you talking to me?
Because I wanted to highlight how bad things are.
Yeah, I mean, if I was him, I'd kept my mouth shut, frankly, on national television, because somebody might come looking into his books. But what he describes there is exactly the same bear trap that every Prime Minister and head of the Department of Work and Pensions has found themselves standing on, and that's this Gordian knot of trying to work out how it's better to go to work, how you balance the benefits with people who need it, and how you make sure that you don't sit at home and you're doing better by not working than you are by going to work. And that fella there is describing exactly that. It's no surprise we're losing £10 billion a year, Harrison.
Yeah, it's a benefits trap. It's interesting. Reform have spoken about this, where in an instance, if you were to abolish income tax for those earning up to £20,000, then you've incentivized people to get into work. But otherwise, like that Heath just pointed out there is no point. And until there is that incentive to actually go out and work, and obviously the biggest incentive for most people to work is financial, then there isn't anything there. One thing that's worth pointing out is, do you know how many people are currently claiming benefits in this country?
Go on, give us the number.
It's over 20 million. So which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot.
Does that include your old age pension?
Good question. I didn't do my homework on that. Maybe, probably. I hope so. Fingers crossed.
Well, yeah, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? But maybe it doesn't. I mean, there's all manner of benefits and various bits and pieces. And look, you know, we live in a civilized world. We have a safety net for those who need it, whether they're sick, if there's a disability, some other challenge, if you're off work because of no fault of you, had an accident, whatever. You know, there's obviously issues when you've had children and things like that. We understand the need for a benefit system. We don't understand the need for one that gives money away that shouldn't be given away, and certainly one that can allow a £10 billion shortfall at the end of the year because of fraud and error. That's not a system. That's a crime scene, frankly.
I just checked while you were talking. So it's 22.6 million, and it includes pension credit, but not the state pension.
Not the state pension. So there we go.
So yeah, I mean that's huge. And I think what's more alarming about this is the benefit system is obviously very generous anyway, and yet people are still going out their way to scam it to the tune of 10 billion. Now, I personally think 10 billion is worthy of completely scrapping an entire department of failure. I mean, seriously, if you were a company and you oversaw such large failures of that amount, what is their function?
Well, you'd just be closed down. You wouldn't be working. You wouldn't be in business. You know, you'd be on your knees.
And this is the difference in stance from this country, which is still wrestling to get people in the office 2 days a week, right? Compared to what we're doing in America, where it's like, actually, we don't need you anymore. We will give you a severance pay and that's it. The attitude difference is completely stark, and I think it's such a shame because when our tax burden continues to increase, and it will continue to increase due to fiscal drag, people are going to think, what's the point? And we've already seen that. We've seen a 150% increase in millionaires leave this country in last year alone. And the problem is, people don't seem to realise that the top 1%, well, I'm not sure what it will be anymore because of how many have left, but the top 1% pay around about, on average, a third of all income tax receipts. Now, you've got to think, so for every millionaire leaving, how many minimum wage workers do we need to plug that gap? Probably quite a few. And I just think the attitude towards spending money is disgraceful. It's almost like people don't realise how much hard work goes into earning money.
Absolutely.
And it's just gone like it's nothing.
All right, listen, on that point, Harrison, stay with us. Harrison Allman-Varty, Reform UK councillor with us on the programme. More stories still to come. That question to you, your views on Brexit, 5 years since that big green light was given. Has it been a success? Do you regret the way you voted? If you were one of those Remainers, do you wish you'd gone for Brexit? Now you can see the democratic process, the autonomous nature of the United Kingdom that wasn't there before. 0344 499 1000. Just gone 20 past 1. This is Talk.
Why does this matter? Because elections are years away. Many things can change between now and then. Maybe reform will crash and burn. I hope not. But this looks and feels like a revolution in our politics. It looks and feels like finally there is an end in sight to the two-party system. We can't say whether it will or it won't happen, but from where I'm sitting, something very, very exciting is underway.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
25 past 1, we have Harrison Allman-Varty with us, Reform UK councillor, the second youngest councillor in the land now, Harrison. Although Brad did say, I think there's an inverted compliment here, Harrison. He says, bloody hell, Ian, I've got socks older than Harrison, says Brad in Cambridgeshire. So there you go.
Thanks,
your youth has still been noted, despite the fact you've been overtaken.
Do you know, my title is actually Leader of Reform UK in Elbridge Council. Because I'm the only one.
Because you're the only one. So I was telling somebody this the other day. You are literally.
I lead myself.
You lead yourself. What a great place to be with that your cabinet of just you. I like it. You're responsible for. You're a spokesperson for everything.
I better not step out of line.
No, don't do that. Press watchdog taken over by transgender lobby. Here's an interesting one. Conrad Rober is the author of a report on media coverage of trans issues. Claims the Independent Press Standards Organisation (IPSO) has been influenced by the trans lobby. He alleges that IPSO pressured him to make edits under the influence of LGBT charities like Mermaids and Stonewalls, using terms like she for a transgender rapist, which was just bonkers, frankly. I don't know why, firstly, these people are obsessed with the contents of somebody's pants and their sexuality or their gender. I've got no idea why they spend so much time on this and why they would insist on referring, even phrases like she had a penis. Were mentioned in this, where the author was told you've got to use the phrase she, not he. This is the kind of mucked up world we're living in.
But for who? Do you know who this is? And I'm going to say he is a child sex offender.
Correct.
I mean, awful. I mean, seriously awful. And for what? With the reason why, I mean, I'm sorry, don't get me wrong, there will be legitimate trans people out there, of course, right? And if someone wants me to call them she, I will be respectful, fine. But someone who said this, who has clearly said this because he wants to go into a woman's prison, is despicable. And I think actually, not that I'm some big trans right activist, right? This harms actual people, very few people who are trans, because it just completely takes it away from it, because this person is trying to use it for his own gain. I think it's disgusting. And we owe this person nothing.
Correct. And the offender in question had no gender confirmation surgery, no hormone treatment, just decided one day to say, I'm a woman, and lobbed a wig on. And then the journalism was expected to follow and go, yeah, because you said you're all, we will call you a she. And it's just bonkers. But it's amazing when you do look through, certainly newspapers, as distinct from some areas of broadcasting, although broadcasters are guilty of it as well, certainly on some channels. It's amazing how many people cave in on this and very casually just, yes, it's a she. She has decided. It's not a she, it's a bloke with a penis and a beard who just decided one day to pretend they were a woman because they thought they might get into a woman's prison.
Of course. I mean, look, Nicola Sturgeon lost her job over this, and she was almost immune to all sorts. And so this just shows. I personally think people need to remember the biology of things, which seem to go out the window, whether that's for sports or prisons. Every GCSE science pupil is taught what the difference between an XX and XY chromosomes do, and there is nothing you can do to change them. Like I said, if someone is trans, I'm not going to go out my way to offend someone. Sure, I'll be respectful, but I'm certainly not going to go out my way to treat a child sex offender who is not even saying it anyway. They're doing it for his own gain, so he doesn't have to go into male prison.
Simple.
It's disgusting, and actually it should add on to his time, in my opinion.
I would have thought so, yes. For lying in the court, there's another 20 years, you filthy swine. Finally, this one, Donald Trump will be aware of that extraordinary press conference yesterday, blaming diversity hiring for the deadly crash between the military helicopter and passenger plane. 67 people killed in Washington, D.C. Here's Donald Trump claiming non-common sense.
I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level.
It is at the highest level. The difficulty, I mean, this is pure Trump, if you like, Harrison. I thought it was insensitive that on a day where mothers and fathers are waiting for their dead child to be pulled from a freezing river in Washington, that the president decided to start talking about, the fact that the Air Traffic Control Department has got a politically correct agenda, which might be true, by the way, and a very worthy debate. Not sure yesterday was the time to have it.
I would have said it. I'm not the president.
And he didn't know at that point either.
I'm just a mere councillor in Surrey. However, yes, I agree with you. I personally think if it came out that in the instance the person making decisions was promoted and standards were lowered based on EDI hires or whatever they call it, then yes, he's right to highlight that. However, I do think speculating on the day it happened probably wasn't the best move. I do think actually it's quite insensitive because there are, tens of families who are suffering and will be very upset. Yeah. So probably not the right time to highlight it, I'll be honest. However, he has highlighted something that is worth noting, where we do have situations in this country now where standards are lowered to increase and meet quotas. Now, that might not matter for a marketeer, right? But it does matter for pilots, it does matter for doctors, and it does matter for judges and stuff like this. So whether there are situations where we cannot have a lowering of standards. Now, like I said before, I'm a straight, white, privately educated English male. I'm finished.
Outrageous.
Okay? I'm not taking any.
Get in the bin, Harrison. You got no right round these parts.
I'm surprised that you and I have even got the airtime.
Can't believe we've even booked you. I can't even believe I'm speaking to you. Neither of us should be here, frankly. Listen, we've got to wrap up, Harrison, just for time. Always good to have you with us and have a cracking weekend as well. He is Harrison Allman-Varty, the leader of reform in the Elmbridge Council. He's the only Reform member there because he crossed the line from being a Tory, and he's 19. Top man. Thank you to him. We're going to talk about Brexit as well. Dennis McShain, the former Labour MP and former Minister for Europe, is going to be with us, along with Lance Foreman, a name you will know. He's a former Brexit Party MEP. We'll find out what both of them have to say, particularly to each other, in a couple of moments. Has Brexit been a success? 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
0344 499 1000. Dave in Bristol says, you'll remember the old saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. All the benefit fraudsters and those living off benefits, when they don't need to be, obviously do not believe in it or its principle. Unfortunately, those paying for their free lunches are the workers and taxpayers like me, a pensioner that still pays tax for them to freeload. Enough is enough. Should be said, by the way, a big chunk of that, Dave, by the way, is actually error rather than fraud. And I'm only saying that because that in itself throws up another, frankly, unforgivable situation as to how our system, despite it being the 21st century with whiz-kid computers and goodness knows what else, we can still have a benefit system that can't get it right. We've been debating this for decades. Oh, there's loads of money given out, like 3 million a week in fraud or something, in error. How does that happen so regularly? That's another story. We'll come back to that. It's 5 years since Britain left the EU. Of course, Downing Street says there's no marking of the occasion. It's not really an anniversary. I didn't expect lights up or some kind of celebration or dance from the Prime Minister, but it is 5 years today. The Conservatives are accusing Labour of trying to undo Brexit, while Reform UK leader Nigel Farage says if he becomes PM, he'll deliver a proper Brexit that 17.4 million people voted for, something he's long argued has still not been achieved. It comes as a new poll shows just 1 in 10 think Brexit has been a success, with over half the public backing to rejoin. Let's chat with Dennis McShain, former Labour MP and former Minister of State for Europe, and Lance Foreman, former Brexit Party MEP. Afternoon to you both. Dennis, I know you were a Remainer, very passionate about Europe. You were Minister for Europe as well. How do you see it going so far, 5 years down the lane? Did you pop the champagne today to celebrate?
No, it's very bad. So many jobs lost. It's a tale, if you like, of 2 millions. We've made 1 million fewer cars than we were before 2016. And the Tories, Mr. Sunak and Miss Braverman and the rest of it, Kemi Badenoch, have imported 1 million immigrant workers from India, Pakistan, Ghana, Nigeria, to do the jobs that Europeans just, a short drive or flight away were doing, coming backwards and forwards and fitting in according to how the labour market needed them. But with 1 million people coming in on visas with their children, dependents, it's completely changing the population nature of Britain. So we heard the chairman of the Federation of Small Businesses on the BBC this morning. His members are suffering. About 20,000 small businesses have simply stopped selling to Europe, stopped exporting because they can't get in there easily. I'd really love to see where this famous upside is going to be coming from.
Yeah, well, maybe Lance can tell us. Lance Foreman, good afternoon to you. Dennis there, I'm true to his own beliefs and principles, but outlining there some of the issues. Where is the upside?
Well, we haven't really seen any upside as yet. I think it's too early to tell. I think basically what's happened is, we were sort of locked in this space, and the Brexit vote was about learning how to unpick the lock so that we could leave. And we've sort of just been standing by the exit for the last 5 years saying, right, we can get out now, but, should we?
What haven't we done, Lance, that we should have done?
Well, there's so much that we should have done, and in so many different areas. Deregulation is the big one for me. There were many different reasons why people voted for Brexit, and for some it was about sovereignty, some about regulation, some about immigration, but we haven't done any of them. And I think that's the problem. In my view, the main reason why people voted for Brexit wasn't those specific issues as such. It was because for the previous 25 years or so, our economy had sort of stagnated, nothing was getting done, and people just felt that they wanted something to change. They felt that all the politicians across the board were just sort of tinkering around and nothing was really getting done. And what they wanted was some really bold leadership, sort of almost like you're getting in America now. They wanted politicians that could actually lead us and make some big decisions. And I think what's happened is we had the vote, And then rather than actually make those bold decisions, we're back with the same people before, sort of tinkering around. And, you know, we haven't taken advantage. But the only good news, I would say, is that we're in a position that when we get that strong leadership, we're in a position that we can take advantage.
I mean, is that fair enough, Dennis? I mean, you know, if you think of people like Rishi Sunak and certainly Theresa May, I mean, I never quite understood where Rishi stood on all of this. We know that Theresa May was a Remainer. We know Keir Starmer was a Remainer. Boris Johnson, well, depending on which way the wind was blowing that day, depending on whether he was a Remainer or a Brexiteer. We've not really had a leader that's got Brexit in their DNA, and if we had one, then you'd soon see those sunny uplands.
Yeah. I mean, I go long on Trump today, a man who, as America is grieving the loss of all those lives at the bottom of the Potomac, says the fault is because air traffic controllers in America are mentally defective. I don't want that kind of leader. I want a Margaret Thatcher who blasted us into the single market, who got all the Japanese companies to come in because we were in Europe. And the idea that quitting the world's biggest market is nuts. Now, I know Lance's firm, Lance's family firm, not himself, is the best smoked salmon producer in England, in London.
Yeah.
There's a kid from...
Had some last night, as it happens, but that's another story.
I am delighted that Lance, when he was running it, got European protection for London smoked salmon. So here we've got a real proper true European on your show, Ian, and he's whining away saying it's not happening in the long term. As Lord Maynard Keynes said, long term, schmong term. In the long term, we're all dead. Lance, I'll die before you, and when I die, if we're still out of Europe, we'll be poorer, and then 40 years later when you die, I don't know what state we'll be in.
Hopefully you'll have a salmon sandwich in your hand, Dennis, when it happens. I mean, were you protected, Lance, by Europe?
Well, now you've brought my business into it. Let me just say a few things in terms of business and Europe. You know, our business has been going for 120 years, so we've been around as a business a lot longer than the EU was ever around. And, you know, when we joined the EU in the mid-1970s, at that stage, we were already exporting into Europe. We were exporting into the Far East and into the USA. And everyone said that joining the common market would be great for business in Europe. It didn't bring us any extra business in Europe at all. We were already trading there. We got no extra business from it at all. What it did bring us was just a huge raft of expensive regulations that have just made our business less and less productive as every single year has gone by. It hasn't helped us at all. We left the EU now. We still trade with Europe. We're not finding it any more difficult now than it was before. The tough thing about business is finding the customer, convincing them we've got the best products, convincing that the price is great, getting them to order, getting the bill collected. That's the tough stuff. Filling in a form that takes 5 minutes when you're shipping the goods is not a big deal. So, it is.
Okay. Dennis, were you going to come in on that point?
It's the regulations that are the killer. It's the regulations. But what we learned, okay, Dennis, is that having Brexited, what we learned is that British bureaucrats are just as bad as the EU bureaucrats. You know, we've gold-plated so many of these regulations, and we have to get out this mindset. And my hope is that what's going on in America now with Doge will actually, some of that magic will sort of...
All right, Dennis McShain, can you respond to that point?
Simply, I listened to Martin Maguire, the boss or the chairman of the Federation of Small Business on the radio at 6 o'clock this morning, and he said that it was a complete nightmare. The Institute of Chartered Exporters says 20,000 of their members have simply had to close down and gone out of business because you may be able to export to Europe. I'm delighted for you, Lance, but others can't because there are now barriers that Boris Johnson and David Frost and all you Brexiteers put in the place. When we voted in 2016, it was to leave the EU like Switzerland or Norway, not be subject particularly to their laws. It was not to cut all links, to cut all access to workers, to cut all inward investment. Paris, the stock exchange of Paris now sells more shares than the London Stock Exchange. Lord Mayor,
not anymore. We've come back.
No, I'm sorry. You're confusing the financial services sector, which is very strong in Britain. Thank God we got one sector that's working well. But I'm quoting the Lord Mayor of London, who's not Labour, not pro-European, and he says London's taken a big hit. Big report at the end of last year. I mean, when are we going to wake up and smell the coffee? It's not working.
As a businessman, Dennis, as a businessman, when you're looking for markets, when you're looking for customers, you look for customers that are growing, that have got great opportunities for you to sell your products into. You don't sell your goods and your wares to companies that look like they're on their last legs and going bust. Europe is one of the worst performing areas of the globe, and it has been for a long, long time. The German economy has performed worse than ours since Brexit. We should be focusing on growing markets like the USA, and we've done brilliantly to accede to the CPTPP, which is a bigger market now with us as part of it than the EU.
All right, Dennis, can I ask you this? When you were Minister for Europe and Tony Blair would send you over to those big meetings on your lovely private jet or whatever the heck it was, you turn up. I know. You turn up at these powwows with your cohorts and counterparts from all those other all the other ministers, say Spain, Portugal, etc. Did you ever look at it, this monolithic system, and think, man alive, this is absolute. What are we paying for here? Why are we spending £18.4 billion a year for all of this? The increase in bureaucracy was absolutely huge. Nothing like the common market back in the 70s. 2 parliaments, its own currency, a flag, a national anthem, 17 zillion presidents. I mean, what the heck was it? It's like another planet going on over there.
Yeah. Just imagine America, if every state had its own currency and its own laws, how well that would work. I went there and I did fight very hard. Luckily, I could speak French or German. I think I just fell off the chair finding any English person who could speak a European language and gave me what we wanted. But in general terms, 1945, before I was born, long before Lance was born, Britain traded about 5% with the rest of the world. When we joined the European Union, we're now trading at about 15%. It's called trade, and it's across the channel from us. They all have their own laws, their own rules, every law that affects trade has to be accepted by a national parliament.
But we had to pay £18 billion a year, Dennis, to do that trading. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of money. I mean, Tony Soprano couldn't have made that up.
Well, for heaven's sake, we've lost 1 or 2% of GDP. You know what our total GDP is? £80 million. I mean, you think Elon Musk knows what £80 million buys? I mean, soon Nigel Farage, all the extra money he's making now as a sort of as a Tusk, Trump, Barker in England, he's going to be much richer than that. So it was a way of getting incredible, good access, better access. All of our people could buy a little home, little flat, if they wanted to, in the south of Spain, the south of France. Metal workers, steel workers, coal miners, where I was an MP, could live in warmer parts of Europe, like North Americans could retire in Florida, because America is one economy, one set of laws, one set of rules, and everybody obeys them. And we seem to think, oh, if we don't like that, we don't have to obey them.
OK, all right. Can I just a final point to both of you then? Let me ask you this first, Lance. At the moment, then, I think your contention is we haven't really got the Brexit that was imagined by people like yourself and Nigel and others. Going forward, 5 years down the line, so it'll be the 10th anniversary of Brexit, will it be a success? Will it look as you want it to look?
I certainly think it's moving in that direction. You know, I think that people across Europe and in the UK are seeing what's going on in America. It's growing fast. There's a real positivity and optimism out there. Okay. And I think that they will want some of that over here. If we carry on with the same old policies that we've had for the last 25 years in Europe, you know, we're doomed to failure. So I'm actually quite optimistic about the future.
OK. Yeah. And Dennis, even as a Remainer, even somebody who fights from that particular corner of this debate, can you see in 5 years' time? You know, it's not a law of physics that we're in the EU, right? I mean, Japan's not in it. India's not in it. They rub along rather well. I mean, can you see a bright future outside the EU?
I'd love to believe it, but they trade into Europe and they're not worried about obeying European rules. Here we have this constant whine that sharing and being a partner with other countries, sharing common rules, is somehow robbing us of our birthright. I would love, as Winston Churchill said, talking about the 1930s, people seem to think that we should up anchor and moor off Canada, and then we won't have to worry about Europe. We cannot become American. I frankly don't think, as a human being, I want to live under some of the really evil things that President Trump already is doing. That's not British. It's not English. It's not what we fought for in the Second World War. And I go quite long, Lance, before saying, let's become an American colony. Be proud to be British. Be proud to be a great leading European nation once again.
I tell you what, Dennis, as an old socialist that you are, I say that respectfully, you cited 2 Conservative Prime Ministers in this discussion. That's not bad. Great to have you both with us.
Did I mention Tony Blair, did you say that?
Oh, yes, so Tony Blair got a mention as well. Yeah, that's the 3rd Conservative Prime Minister. Dennis, thank you. Dennis McShain, former Labour MP, he was Minister of State for Europe, and, of course, Lance Foreman, former Brexit Party MEP. I think he owes me a salmon for that as well. Thank you to both of them. 0344 499 1000. What's your take on all of this? Has Brexit been a success? This is Talk.
Unfair to her actually, because the female, the woman that she asked, "Are you a man?" It's a fair question really, because this woman, identifying as a woman, had a bloody beard. This has got to stop, hasn't it?
I was, as you know, so angry when I saw this story. I am sick and tired of this. And in actual fact, I said yesterday, I put out a tweet, that it's time for the Lionesses and other women footballers to stand up for these young girls who aspire to play football.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Coming up on 522, don't go away, Joe in Bournemouth with you in just a second. On that issue of Brexit, here's a voice note from Claire.
We can't really say whether Brexit has worked or not, because Brexit was never really implemented. Unfortunately, the general public have been fed a pup. by not telling them that we're still half in and half out, and the people of this country have been given false narratives about how badly we're doing after Brexit, and telling us that it was a bad thing to do, which the public have bought into. However, considering the rest of Europe have gone bust, and with the help of the Labour regime, so have we, where's the argument?
Where's the argument? Joe's in Bournemouth. What are your thoughts on this, Joe? Good afternoon.
Well, quite similar to a lot of what we've heard already, and the fact is that all we've done is put word left, but we haven't actually seen anything happen since then. No one sort of had the backbone to stand up, or they don't want to stand up and actually leave properly and make the full commitment to leaving.
Do you... So what is it that we need to do then that we're not currently doing? Because, I mean, the argument is that there are some obvious agreements that we would come to with the EU like we would come to with Asia or America.
Well, we need to stand up and actually be strong and stop being bullied around. Exactly like we're talking about immigration and things, we should just turn around to France and say, you can't fish our waters until it's sorted. We've got to start standing our ground. We've got to start saying, you know what, we're happy to trade by ourselves. We're a good, strong country. We can trade by ourselves. You can trade with us on good terms and keep trading. If not, sorry, do one. And we need someone like Trump to get in and do that.
Do you think Nigel Farage is likely to become the next Prime Minister? Because he would claim he will do that.
I don't know. I don't know where we're going as a country with the split now. I think we're in a dangerous time again with the split between Labour and Reform. But again, with your two guests that are on, one big thing that I did pick up on, your two guests that you just had talking about Brexit, they didn't actually, in my eyes, pick up on the main point of what the average person like myself voted for when we voted to leave, and that was to not have people that are unelected tell us how to live our life.
100%. The democratic argument was the strongest argument, stronger than any other argument, frankly.
Exactly, and it wasn't financial. I knew at first we're likely to take a hit.
100%. 100%. I said this on the radio from 2016. There's going to be bumps in the road. It might be a 10-year plan, but the democratic angle, and by the way, it doesn't get mentioned often enough, this, Joe. Remember, Europe was also growing its tentacles into other areas, you know, like police forces and armies and things like that.
Well, there was a lot of dangerous talk with the army, wasn't there?
Correct.
There.
And that will happen. You know, that will happen, and we won't be part of it. Great call, Joe. Thank you very much indeed. Let's get a word from Andrew in Halifax. What are your thoughts on this, Andrew? Afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian. Well, as you know, I voted Leave in 2016 and would do so again in a heartbeat. But I just wanted to give you an analogy, if I can. It's a little bit long-winded, but please bear with me, because when people say that, Brexit's been a disaster. So just picture this situation. So you rent an apartment that's painted this hideous shade of red. And you go to the landlord and say, I don't want it red anymore. I want to paint it magnolia. And the landlord disagrees, and you have a bit of an argument, but you finally beat him down, and he sends round his decorator, Mr. Starmer, to paint the flat magnolia. But instead of applying the paint with a roller and brush, he just gets the buckets and throws them all over the wall, all over your furniture, and et cetera, et cetera. And then when you complain at the end, turns around and says, well, you wanted the flat magnolia in the first place. It's all your fault. No, it isn't.
Yeah.
It's the fact that you didn't carry out the job as paid for and as instructed. And this is exactly what we've got now.
Starmer the sofa harmer with his paint of doom. There it is. Do you sense then that we can right this wrong at some point, Andrew? We've only got about 30 seconds. Can it be kind of invigorated to give the Brexit that you voted for?
Well, I'm hoping so, and the starting point with that has to be Northern Ireland, because the way that the Irish government and nationalism operated in cahoots with the EU to partition our own country, as the fantastic Ben Abid, my God, I wish that guy was Prime Minister, has said time and time again. That needs to be righted. I predicted this with Mike Graham back in, I think it was 2021, that they would use Northern Ireland to bring the whole UK back into alignment.
And also, it's also worth saying, and this doesn't really get said at all, Andrew, when they were working out the Good Friday Agreement, bearing in mind all those parties had said at some point, we'll have a vote on our membership. Somebody should have factored that into that agreement. And I know it might have been a complication that they didn't need, but that was bearing in mind Labour, the Tories, Lib Dems had all said at some point, we'll have a referendum on our membership of the EU. But nobody thought of giving that a nod in the Belfast Agreement. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you to Joe. Great calls coming in on this. Brexit, 5 years down the line, has it been a success? 0344 499 1000. We've got Theo Usherwood with us in the next section as well. Lots to get. Brand new voice of doom as well. It's all kicking off today. Let's get the latest news headlines first here on Talk at 2 o'clock.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Good afternoon. 3 minutes after 2 o'clock. Welcome back to the programme, the home of common sense. It's 5 years on, exactly 5 years to the day, since the UK officially left the EU. It was 9 years, almost, since we had the vote on it. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is not marking the occasion. There's no little jig outside the number 10 door from Keir. Nigel Farage, however, has vowed to deliver the Brexit 17 million people voted for if he becomes Prime Minister. We'll continue to take your calls and comments on that. Also this afternoon, more than 10% of farmland is set to be converted to solar farms, woodland and housing to help meet, you guessed it, net zero by 2050. If we don't get there, we're all going to die, all right? Get used to it. And a Holocaust Memorial exhibition has been banned from Parliament for being too political, despite pro-Palestinian activists being allowed to campaign there. What is going on? We'll talk to the man behind that story in just a couple of moments. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Michelle says we will absolutely get dragged into the EU army. Why do you think our military has been so underfunded and depleted? Oh, look, we need the EU for defence. It's clear as day what they are doing. The UK-German defence treaty has already been signed. And I think that, to me, was one of the it kind of showed the pathological evangelical nature of those that support. If you think about France and Germany, largely the architects of the EU back in the day, and it was a sort of Franco-German sort of steel and oil agreement, I think, back then. Giscard d'Estaing and all these characters that were involved, and you could kind of see the purpose of it and the point of it. But of course, those that sit in powerful or influential positions in Brussels and elsewhere, they see this as much more than a common market. They do see it as a United States of Europe, and I'm not saying that in that kind of scaremongery kind of way. Genuine, I hope, intelligent observation. That is how they see it. I mean, it's got two parliaments, it's got presidents, it's got a currency, it's got a flag, it's got an anthem. I mean, it wouldn't have to be Colombo to go, it kind of looks like a sort of United States thing. And of course, what they want is something, because they sleep better at night, these evangelists. They want it to be, to have a common defence policy. They want it to have more commonality in things like law and order and policing. And there's already some, and there's agreement and there's working arrangements, and some of that is rather useful, of course it is. But those that really sing from the pulpit for the expansion of the EU are not just talking about rules and how big a piece of timber needs to be and what the laws are on importing fish. It goes much further than that. And I think that's a genuine reason, democratically, to say that isn't what we voted for, that isn't what we want Europe to be. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It doesn't make you some mad extremist because you happen to believe that the tentacles are reaching too far. Let's get a word on this and all the other big political stories of the day. Theo Usherwood is back with us, the political commentator. Afternoon to you, Theo.
A very good afternoon to you, Ian.
Nice to have you with us as ever. So it's 5 years to the day. Goodness me, yes. I was there in Manchester when the result was given back in 2016. We knew it was going to take a few years to put it all into place. Yeah. We were working at the same place at the time when all of this was coming out. There wasn't a day. I remember the journalist Ian Dunt saying to me in about 2015, the reason he didn't want, I mean, Ian would be a Remainer, but the reason he didn't want a vote on it was because he said, we will talk about nothing else every day for the next 10 years. And he kind of turned out to be right on that. A rare moment where a socialist got it spot on. We've talked about nothing else. Every day, forever, there seemed to be a debate on this, and it kind of continues, maybe slightly less so these days, but it's still there. Nigel Farage saying if he was Prime Minister, we'd have a proper Brexit. And of course, Brexiteers argue that we never did get a proper Brexit.
Yes, I mean, I remember being in Parliament Square when, of course, we left the European Union. We had the countdown. Nigel Farage and his wing of the Leave campaign had a huge sort of stage in the middle of Parliament Square with musicians and singing and dancing. Of course, this is the moment when this is 5 years to the day when, of course, that Boris Johnson had just won the general election. The stalemate had been broken because he got that 80-seat majority. He was able to pass his deal with the European Union into law, which paved the way for our actual exit from the European Union. That was, of course, because Theresa May, the previous Prime Minister, had squandered a small Conservative majority in the general election of 2017, and it meant that we had that stalemate with no fewer than 3 meaningful votes on a deal that nobody could agree to, not least because the Conservatives didn't think that Theresa May's deal with the European Union amounted to, as they saw it, a proper Brexit. So, yes, 5 years since we left the European Union.
Just to interject, Theo, of course, Boris Johnson's spectacular deal, I've got it over the line, was kind of frighteningly similar to the Theresa May deal, right?
It was. Of course, it was. What it had, it was very frighteningly similar to the original Theresa May deal that she got, where she said, no British Prime Minister would do a deal that would put a border down the middle of the Irish Sea. Then Boris Johnson said, and then she said that obviously wasn't palatable. So she went back to the European Union and came back with a deal that actually looked remarkably similar to our current state of actually being in the European Union, where we'd be a member of a customs union and would follow all the EU rules and regulations in order to stay within the customs union and have none of the benefits of actually having left the European Union. And of course, that wasn't palatable. So MPs ended up rejecting that as well. Boris Johnson he got his deal. He got his deal. There is effectively a tax border down the middle of the Irish Sea.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from it. We have, Northern Ireland follows EU rules and regulations because it wants to uphold, and it was seen as a red line that Northern Ireland would have to uphold the Good Friday Peace Agreement, which means there can be no hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And the problem has been, hasn't it, that it's never felt as if the benefits that were promised from leaving the European Union have actually materialized. People don't feel, let's take immigration, for example. If you look at the numbers for last year were 700,000 net migration, 900,000, 750,000, even 900,000 for the year before. When you looked at the net migration figures, we were told we were going to get back control of our borders. If you think back to the years in the run-up to the referendum, actually they were bobbling around at around 200,000 or 300,000 net migration every single year. The economy, we were told we were going to get cheaper goods as a result of leaving the European Union. 2022, 2023, we had inflation into the double digits, and many people have felt much worse off in the years since we left the European Union. So the question as to why Keir Starmer doesn't want to celebrate today as 5 years since we left the European Union, you might well make a case that there is nothing to celebrate. Nigel Farage makes a perfectly valid case that is argued that actually, in terms of leaving the European Union, we haven't taken on the mantle of competing against the European Union.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do it properly, and this is the argument of true Brexiteers, and there is a cogent argument to this, by the way, that actually, if you're going to say that we exist outside the European Union, then you have to accept that we are in competition with the European Union, and that we want to create a Singapore on sea. That in effect, that outside of the European Union, we can have lower taxes, we can have fewer regulations, we could be much more attractive as a business destination for America, for economies in the Far East that want to import their goods into this country. And that actually the argument from the likes of Nigel Farage and those who have always supported this project, it's actually, if you do it properly, if you go for it and you recognise the very essence of what it should be, that we should be in a competition with the EU member states, and we should try and snaffle their business that might otherwise go in because they've got lots of rules and regulations, and pieces of timber have to be so long, and bananas have to be shaped in such a way that actually we could become quite an attractive place for the likes of Donald Trump's America especially to come and want to do business. But obviously Theresa May was never prepared to embrace that. Boris Johnson didn't embrace that, and Keir Starmer certainly isn't going to embrace that. Quite the opposite. There's some talk today that he might actually go for a youth mobility scheme of some description with the EU in order to secure closer trading ties for businesses that have interests in the European Union in order to get closer trading ties. So, there is in number 10, there is nothing to say that they are signed up to the Brexit project. Quite the opposite. I think they would quite like it if they could very quietly secure a closer relationship with the EU and get and see GDP bounce as a result.
Yeah. Well, we're going to watch with interest. The next couple of years are going to be anything but dull on that front, I think, Theo. Thank you for that. Priti Patel confronted with proof migration soared while she was Home Secretary, Theo. That's not a headline Priti Patel wants to see or talk about, perhaps.
It was on Never Mind the Ballots, wasn't it?
Yes.
One of
Harry Cole.
Yeah, great. I mean, he's the best, isn't he, Harry? And I think it speaks to... it speaks to the problem that the Tories have, is that they're in a pincer movement. And what I mean by that is, obviously, you've got Labour, you've got the government saying, well, we're trying to fix the mess, we're trying to sort this, and we're trying to sort out what you left us in terms of migration numbers. And then on the other hand, on the other side of that pincer, you also have Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Usually when you have one government take over from another government, it's just about, and we saw this in 2010 with the coalition, when they took over from Gordon Brown. It's just about the new government saying, look at the mess and we've sorted it out.
Yeah.
The problem for the Conservatives is they're getting done from both sides. So they've got Keir Starmer saying, look at the inheritance we've got, look at the mess we've got to sort out. And then they've got Reform coming in from the other side saying, look at the mess you left, and Labour are not going to sort it out. And actually, Nigel Farage is saying, I need to be Prime Minister to come in and sort it out. So they're getting pincered. And that's the biggest problem for Kemi Badenoch and for Priti Patel. There is nobody in the country that thinks, apart from almost Kemi Badenoch and Priti Patel, that thinks they've done a good job, especially when it comes to dealing with immigration. And that's ultimately the issue, is that they're getting hit, they're getting whacked from both sides of the debate with this. And that's why you can see for Kemi Badenoch, you know, in terms of her leadership, she would much rather that she and her shadow cabinet just said, hands up, we made a mistake, we didn't get it right, and we need to be honest about it, rather than going in front of somebody like Harry Cole again.
Indeed, and of course, Priti Patel says, look, you know, these were not illegal migrants. These are people that came on humanitarian visas. The majority arrived on work or study visas. I mean, I don't know whether that part of this argument's ever going to disappear, even though the numbers are huge. I mean, we saw the story last week about the population increase of the United Kingdom over the next 5, 6, 7 years and such. I don't know what the way around that is. I mean, education is a huge business in this country. And if people come to work, then great. There is a suspicion that not everybody does. And there's some iffy goings on with bringing your auntie and 7 cousins with you and all of that. But, I mean, is that particular component of this discussion ever going to be removed? I doubt it.
The problem we've got in this country is that we aren't training up young people to go into the jobs where we desperately need them to be. Let's just take the NHS, for example, right? The NHS needs doctors, it needs nurses, it needs people, auxiliary staff, to work right across the NHS. And at the moment, we can't get the kids out of school, through the colleges, through the further education establishments, in to fill those jobs. And so the Department for Health and Social Care needs to be able to say to the Home Office, we need so many health and social care visas to get people into this sector to fill those jobs. And that's not just in health and social care, it's right across the board. And then you end up in a situation where they're bringing their aunts and their aunties, or, you know, their aunts and their uncles and their children or whatever. The reason those provisions exist, Ian, is because we need to make this country as an attractive as place as possible for those people to come and work. And if you say to nurses in, let's say we want to bring in nurses from Kenya, if you say to them, well, you can't bring a spouse, they're just not going to say, well, I don't want to leave my family behind, I want to bring my family with me. And then they'll turn down the opportunity to come and work in this country. And that's the issue, that until we get the young people through our colleges to fill those positions, we're not going to solve this particular problem.
Now let's move to this final story. This is your own story that you were able to bring to the table here, Theo. The Holocaust exhibition in Parliament, apparently too political to be displayed. So what's the background to this? What's happened?
So the background to this is there's this he's a great guy, he's called Mark Cave. And he works at the National Holocaust Centre, Museum and Centre. And he had an exhibition called The Vicious Circle. It's a travelling exhibition. It's not particularly big. And it tells the story of anti-Jewish pogroms since World War II, from Kristallnacht in 1938, all the way, of course, up to what happened on October the 7th, 2023. And to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, he applied for that exhibition to be in Westminster Hall. Now, you'll remember Westminster Hall is, when you arrive at the House of Commons, it's this large hall that was originally Parliament, which is where everybody kind of congregates. And he was told in writing, well, I'm very sorry, Mr. Cave, you can't have your exhibition because we can't have anything that's political in Westminster Hall. Everything has to be neutral, which would have been, you'd have thought, and Mr. Cave initially said, OK, I accept this. The only problem is, Ian, that we've seen photographs, repeated photographs of the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign having mass lobbying events in Westminster Hall, And now, there's no suggestion, of course, the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, was involved in this decision. It was made below him by a committee that said, that runs the events, that said, no, we can't have it. But Lord Pickles has come in, and he's, of course, the government's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, and heavily criticised the decision, pointing out, of course, that Westminster Hall is where Winston Churchill, our wartime leader, laid in state, saying he would have been appalled by the decision. And of course, there is no greater fighter against anti-Semitism than Winston Churchill. And there's an appeal now, I guess, for the Speaker to come in and overrule that original decision.
The Commons authorities have said that exhibitions and mass lobbying events are treated differently when considering approval.
Yes, they do say that, but the email to Mark Cave was completely different. It painted a completely different picture. It said, actually, any event of any activity that could be deemed to be political cannot take place in the House in Westminster Hall. And it's worth noting that, and I think this is the real shame about it, is that we should, I guess something's political when people disagree, right? Yeah. People disagree. I don't understand what's there to disagree about the horrors of what happened in the Holocaust. I don't understand what's there to disagree about the horrors of what happened on October the 7th, 2023. And this was, I've seen the exhibition, by the way, and it's hugely powerful. And it just reminds people of the story that the Jewish people have suffered and the dangers that it just carries on, and trying to fight that anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hatred. And I brought the stories to the table, but personally, I really hope that the Commons authorities, who aren't best pleased about the story, actually manage to sort of change their tune.
Let's hope so. Theo, thank you as ever. Have a great weekend. Theo Usherwood, political commentator, with us on the programme. Over to you on any of those stories, particularly the first one. Has Brexit been a success? Your overview on where we're at with Brexit. Has it done what you wanted it to do? Do you regret the way if you were a Remainer, do you think, actually, I wish I had gone for Brexit, or the other way around? Apparently there's a poll out that says more people would vote to rejoin. Not sure about that, but your thoughts on it, 0344 499 1000. That is where you'll find us. This is Talk.
The problem now for people like Nigel Farage, it seems that reset moment that Keir Starmer is talking about getting closer ties to Brussels, is just going to bring us closer and closer. So I think people from Nigel Farage's side of the argument are just going to see that maybe the next few months and years as a betrayal of what happened back in 2016.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Look, 25 past 2. I love this story. A 22-year-old woman who taunted police by commenting, "Hey guys," on her own wanted appeal on Greater Manchester Police's social media has been arrested. She was arrested, found hiding under a pile of children's toys. I'm just wondering, you know, living in a house with lots of children's toys, I'm wondering that we can see on the screen there, there's that she was essentially, it looks like a cot with a load of old toot inside it. A Fisher-Price fest going on there. She was underneath it. So they nicked her. She remains in custody. She was wanted for a serious offence. And if you are wanted by... I love a stupid criminal story. You know, you're wanted for something and then you do something daft, like comment on social media. They found her. They nicked her. Back to your calls. Peter, down in London. How you doing, Peter?
Not too bad, Ian.
Good.
Just a bit annoyed with people not thinking the right way. Not blaming you. I mean, you ask your questions and we bring in. But I'm a business owner.
Yep.
I've owned several businesses, and they trade in countries in Europe, and they trade in countries such as the USA, Argentina, Chile, and I want to say it's completely and entirely up to my businesses and other businesses to abide by the rules and regulations of every country that they trade in, including the European Union, which isn't a country, it's just a foreign political organisation.
Sure.
And our politicians have lied to us. I mean, they do that every time. Look at Sir Keir Starmer recently. But they are telling lies to us, and they've done it for centuries. But
you see, they don't... What's interesting about that, because I think you're right, Peter, they don't think... And this is more... the more you think about this, the more fascinating it is. They don't think they've told lies.
No,
they believe... I think Plato called it the noble lie, when it's OK to tell a lie if the lie is in the greater... for the greater good, for the greater amount of people. So they don't see it as a lie. They're being, you know, economical with the truth, maybe, but it's for our good.
It's our good. It's for our benefit.
It's for our benefit.
They did that during 2020, but that's another subject. But if you thought about it, our country, our government of this country, have signed up to and abide by every rule and every regulation, and there are billions of them from the European Union. They used to have two rule books when we signed up in 1973. We signed up illegally, but that was Ted Heath for you. They had two rule books, large rule books, and now they have, I think, 40 lorries every month that moves from Brussels to Strasbourg.
Yeah, because they for some strange reason, I don't know how anybody thinks that's okay, by the way.
But, especially the eco-mentalists. But we have absolutely no need, and our government have been lying to us, or our governments have been lying to that to us about that for decades. That it is completely. I mean, why don't we, as a country, as a government, have their laws of America abiding, in our laws? They don't do that because it's absolute hogwash, and I'm being very diplomatic with my words.
Why did I mean, the bit that really fascinates me, if you consider, and lots of people make the point, look, when it was a common market, the idea kind of made some sense that if you're going to be trading with people, then you want to make sure that a bit of timber you buy from Spain is going to be conducive with a building site in Peterborough. I kind of get that principle, that there would be sort of guidelines and a business arrangement. How did it go from something that I think on the face of it, look, I'm sure somebody will educate me and say, no, it's not as simple as that. But it seems let's call it straightforward. How did it go from that to this large bureaucracy of all these kind of MEPs and big buildings and Strasbourgs and Brussels?
It was always the plan to do that since the European Coal and Steel Board, I think they were, set up in the 19th.
It was coal and steel. I wrongly said oil and steel earlier. It was German and French, wasn't it, really, that started?
Yeah, I think it was the grandson of Claude Monet, the fantastic French painter.
That's correct, yeah. But why? Where did that? What's behind that dream? What is their?
It's control.
Innate desire to have this kind of. Let's make it bigger and bigger. Let's keep making it bigger.
Well, it's totally about control. I mean, for example, and you probably haven't got time for this, but if you thought about every country in the world, and especially the European Union, when they created out of thin air, the only good thing they ever did, and it took me, you have to excuse me, I was busy building businesses, trying to make a living, keep a roof over my family's head for 20 years. But they created something out of thin air. And I think, I can't remember the exact date, but let's say it was 2000, maybe earlier, maybe slightly later. They created the European Union out of thin air from the European Economic Community.
Yeah.
And at the same time, and with the same thin air, they created their European Central Bank, which then created an infinite supply of money, proving that, like our country with its National Bank of England, they don't need a penny off of you in your tax money. Why do they, when they can create money out of thin air?
Create it out of thin air. It's interesting, Thatcher, of course, back to the original days of the 70s, did back that idea. And then she gave, you will remember, I'm sure, Peter, the no speech in Parliament, which I think was on a question from Simon Hughes, the Liberal Democrat at the time. And kind of had a completely different approach on it. And her point was precisely this, that it was the increase in bureaucracy, that you have unelected characters that would have, not just a say on British matters, but would supersede British laws. Now, anyone with a brain could see the problems with that.
Well, like I say, we've been lied to for I would say 1400 years by various monarchies and so-called kings and queens, because they're stealing money from us and they're lying to us doing it. Simple fact of life.
Yeah, it doesn't get any more blatant than that, does it? Listen, it's a great call, Peter. Thank you. Loved that. Peter in London with a little bit of the chronology and the history of how things have kind of panned out. And Europe and its current form, the EU, I should say, exactly what they wanted from the beginning, I think, is Peter's contention. Over to you. Back to more comments shortly. 0344 499 1000. You can send us a voice note on that number as well if you want to bypass the queues, as they say. All up for some of that. We're going to talk farming net zero, a tenth of farmland to be axed in order to appease the net zero evangelists. We'll talk to William Taylor from Farmers for Action in just a moment on that point as well. Voice notes and messages to 87222. Just gone 2:30. This is Talk.
Across the UK. On DAB+. On YouTube. On your mobile. And on your side. This is Talk.
2523, one in from Anthony in Bristol. Brexit has not been a success because most of Parliament didn't want it and so put up all the obstacles to stop it happening. We should have left with no deal and yet let Europe come to us for a deal, which would have meant we held the upper hand in negotiations. I have no problem with doing a new trade deal with Europe as long as it doesn't stop us doing deals with the rest of the world. And it's all of those little kind of barriers that are put up. Oh, we could do it this way. No, sorry, Brussels has got a little rule for that. You can't do that because of Code 782, paragraph 6. All right, OK, here's another idea. Maybe we could do this deal. No, there's another little code for that as well. So those barriers do pop up all over the place. It is like some kind of mafia cartel going on over there in Britain. Even if you're a supporter of the EU, by the way, you can't fail to see the absolute nonsensical nature of this monolithic bureaucracy that is way out of control for anything it should be. It really doesn't need to be that, even if you're a supporter of the EU. You know, even a pro-German or French individual who loves the whole EU thing. Surely they must have debates on the size of the thing. I mean, if nothing else, 2 parliaments, and they take all the files between one and the other once a fortnight. Man alive, get a grip over there. And also this story, more than 10% of England's farmland is to be used for net zero goals by 2050. Large areas of the countryside are expected to be turned into solar farms, forests and habitats for birds, insects and some fish. The plan is part of a consultation launched by the Environment Secretary Steve Reed on balancing food production, net zero and nature conservation. William Taylor is from Farmers for Action. Good afternoon to you. William, I mean, who doesn't like insects, birds and fish? What's not to enjoy about this?
Good afternoon, everyone. Looking after the environment was something that farmers have done since the year dot right up to now, especially since the Second World War and around that time. And the bottom line is, if farmers were properly paid for their produce, mixed farming would come to the fore again. And mixed farming is very, very environmentally friendly because of all the different crops and all the different provision that gives to the bees and to the birds and to everyone else. There's nobody knows more about the countryside than farmers, and it's time that we were listened to and time for common sense. Let me give you an example. The 10% land taken out of production that we're talking about, that's such a big issue at the minute. There's 3 things you have to remember. First of all, food security is top of the agenda. Accelerated climate change is next to that, and on top of that, the number 3 issue is bad governments around the world. Now, then we come to what the climate change minister just reversed a decision in Lincolnshire for 7,000 acres to be put under solar panels. Now, the place for solar panels is on roofs, and there's plenty of them. But to give you an idea of what 7,000 acres taken out of production can do, it would grow in 1 year 140,000 tonnes of potatoes. Now, McShain's the biggest chip company in the UK. It would keep them going for 1/3 of a year.
Wow.
Now, I just want to remind everybody that McShain's about 3 years ago, now they're not totally to blame on their own, the corporate food retailers putting the usual price pressure down the line to farmers, pushed them so far that potato farmers couldn't afford the electricity to run their cold stores, so they didn't. And there was a big descaling of potatoes going out to the market. One day, McShain's woke up and had no potatoes. And remember, they use 1,500 tonnes a day, so you can work out how many lorry loads of potatoes that is. And they had to go to Europe and buy potatoes in a hurry to keep their factory running. So, of course, the price of potatoes went through the roof where they shouldn't have gone if farmers had been properly paid in the first place. So once that happened, then the price of potatoes went way up, and they're trickling down now to near where they should be, probably to cover costs of production plus a margin inflation link. But we cannot afford to take this amount of land out of production, especially since the UK is only about 57% self-sufficient in food production. And after the Second World War, there was 2 laws put in place to make sure never again would we fall below self-sufficiency. How can we not put food security top of the agenda with people like Putin around and other threats around the world? This is not good government. And now I should point out that there is so much happening at the minute, just within the last 3 months. I mean, farmers are now the key to climate change around the world, to unlocking the key to that, such as all the sugar that everybody's taking, that if turned into ethanol is enough to fly all the airplanes in the world annually. And sugar is costing the NHS about 20 billion a year. 80% of the obesity problems are there. 80% of the diabetes problems are there. After the Second World War, everybody was the healthiest they've ever been in history in the UK. Why? Because for years they couldn't get sugar because of the war. So, we have a lot to talk about, and this needs to be aired in the press at every opportunity. The question needs to be asked now, why are we flying out on our holidays and not flying on ethanol? When the answer is there, and it will not put up the price of food. Yeah. And if anything, it'll encourage people to use more honey, etc., if they do have a sweet tooth. And therefore that comes back to the countryside and everything stacks up. So farmers hold the keys to accelerated climate change. And if you remember 9/11, the Twin Towers went down. And for 2-3 days, there was no airplanes flying in the US and maybe surrounding countries. And you can check it out, the average temperature came down by 2 degrees. And here we are today, already past 1.5 around the world. And aviation, the solution is there. But the pressure from the huge oil giants to keep doing what they do and filling their pockets with billions, and the other side of the story is the grain and oilseeds trade have got the price of all that grain and oilseeds pulled back down again after everybody been told in 2012 biofuel was the answer, which it is. So why are we not talking about it today?
That's a good point. And of course, no VAT and stuff like that on aviation fuel either. So, there could be at least a bonus there for the Exchequer, but apparently not. In terms of farmland being used for other projects other than farming, William, I mean, there is maybe it's a little conspiratorial, but some are smelling a rat here, thin end of a wedge territory. Could we get into that stage or that area where if this net zero plan, this forecast, if it's looking a little iffy for the government, could they start to insist that they take land from farmers? We know other countries have been in a pretty similar situation where they've been told to downgrade some of the things they do, dairy farmers and beef farmers and the like. Is that tinfoil hat territory, or is there something in that?
Look, the solution is simple. In Northern Ireland, we have what's called the Northern Ireland Farm Welfare Bill, currently with the Agriculture Committee in Stormont, and they are scrutinising that bill with a view to taking it forward. Now, that bill, if enacted, solves the 25% plus family farmers who are living below the poverty line and certainly have no money to pay the Chancellor 20% inheritance tax and more. So the bill seeks to put in the farmers' pockets a minimum of the true cost of production plus a margin inflation linked, and that's across everything that's produced in Northern Ireland, and obviously it will have an influence to England, Scotland, Wales and Southern Ireland and further afield. The point is, if we had a UK farm-wide welfare bill, farmers would then know that whatever they decided to do on their farm would return a profit for them, and they would diversify. They would change away from having big numbers of cows and excessive numbers of pigs and other things, because they have a choice that whatever commodity they decide to grow, they will get paid. So you would have a musical chairs of activity in the UK, which can only be good for biodiversity. And we can't emphasize that enough. So as such, it's up to the press now to take this forward, and we are requesting a meeting with Ed Miliband, and we intend to put the case to him just to change direction on covering the UK with solar panels. I mean, what tourist is going to want to come to the UK to see fields covered in solar panels? You know, that's not why they come to the UK.
Not
so
really.
we better watch what we're doing here.
I can't imagine that sitting there in the atlases and the guidebooks of recommended places to go when you set foot in Blighty. Listen, William, always great to gauge your views on these things. Thank you, sir. William Taylor from Farmers for Action. 2:45 on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Brand new Voice of Doom on the way. I'm grateful to many of you as well who've got in touch saying, why did you not mention that Dennis McShain, the man you had on, former Europe Minister, is actually a convicted fraudster. He did go to jail for MPs' expenses. I think he was one of, was it 5 or 6 MPs? Ended up going to jail. I think he served about 12 weeks of a 6-month sentence for 12 grand's worth of iffy receipt that he put forward. He did indeed. But he was, it has to be said, still the Europe Minister under Tony Blair, hence the reason why he raises his head into the public sphere from time to time. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
I think the problem now for people like Nigel Farage, it seems that reset moment that Keir Starmer is talking about getting closer ties to Brussels is just going to bring us closer and closer. So I think people on from Nigel Farage's side of the argument are just going to see that maybe the next few months and years as a betrayal of what happened back in 2016.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one in from Gary, who says, I'm so glad you pointed out what should be the bleeding obvious in the, as regards that EU membership is not free. The cost for each man, woman and child in this country was around about £140 a head, and if we rejoined, it would be nearer £200 a head, because the EU budget has gone up by 18% since we left, and we would likely lose our rebate. So here is the question we should ask all of those who want to rejoin. Are you prepared to have a £200 X number, to have £200 X the number times the number of people in your household deducted from your bank account by the government on the 1st of January every year to cover your share of the membership fee? How about you, Ian? Are you and your perceived benefits of being in the EU worth £800 a year to you and your family? I don't know what my perceived benefits are, to be honest, because I can't find any, Gary, but I take the point. He's absolutely right, if you look at it like that. And what's extraordinary, by the way, just to add to the sort of curious nature of the bureaucratic problem of the EU, given that we live in a world, a digital world, where half the workforce want to work from home, etc., particularly in the civil service, you would think that the cost of running the EU, the admin side of it, would get less and less over time, because you just simply wouldn't need, you certainly don't need two parliaments. You hardly need one of that size. I did a radio show on the last day we were members of the EU. I went over to Brussels, did a programme there, sat there for hours alongside Anne Widdecombe and others. I couldn't believe this building I was in. It was like something from Game of Thrones. It was so huge and labyrinthine. It was all over the show. It sprawled into different postcodes. It was an extraordinary place. And looking at that and trying to work out what is the purpose. I know that you have to have a headquarters for something, I get that. But frankly, it could have been a village hall somewhere in, I don't know, Berlin, rather than Brussels. Just something a little more streamlined is what I think most people would call for. Matt's in Cheshire on the issue of Brexit. How are you doing, Matt?
Hi, good afternoon, Ian. I would just go on what you just said about that building. I was thinking the EU is like the NHS. It's basically a massive way of keeping corporates and socially minded people, socialist minded people in highly paid jobs at the expense of the rest of every other citizen throughout Europe.
Correct.
And what we have today is nothing like what anybody expected Brexit to be. Yeah. And we all know that anyway. What we've got is it's like a Tory, wet, watered down Brexit. And the figure I always used to use when arguing about Brexit, when they talked about poor business people who had to fill in a few more forms, it must have been soul destroying for them. 72% of British businesses never had any involvement with the EU prior to the referendum. The only companies that did have any connection were either huge corporations or pretty big businesses that were usually probably owned by higher upper middle class people. Yeah. So the entire thing was a huge inconvenience to politicians and to corporations. And what they would rather try and negate democracy and just to have their own way. That was what we saw during the entire process.
I think we did.
We'll trample all over democracy because a few huge corporations and rich men have got to fill in a few more forms.
And of course, if you're that wedded, and I don't know why people are that wedded to it, by the way, Matt, that's the bit I can't really work out, is that, you know, the relationship some people have with the EU is a little more than just about trade, right? What is it, you know, when people used to say, well, I feel European, which is just a lie. It's just something people invent in their own head. I feel Europe. What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything, really. But where does that come from? What is the necessity to want to align yourself with something that you can't even explain?
I think if the referendum had happened before social media, I don't think half the sort of lunacy and the... I think half of it's just contrarianism. Yep. You won and we hate you because you won. And the media, the Labour Party and the Conservatives were always going to do everything to make Brexit appear as if it was a failure, to try and make us sort of have an immediate, swift return.
Yeah.
We've only been out for 5 years.
True.
And we were in for most of my life before.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can't think of one tangible thing apart from entire town centres being taken over by foreign shops.
Yeah, I think that's there's that, and apparently your passport was worth more.
Yeah, or you could go to Warsaw and get a job on a fifth of the wages that you would have got.
Yeah, because I've always craved to do that. If I can get a gig on Gdansk FM, then I'm up for it. Matt, great call, thank you. That's Matt. Don't go away, Kim. We will get you on. Kim is in Leicester on this same point. Let's look at Voice of Doom. It's a brand new Voice of Doom. Yesterday's went. Here's the brand new voice.
Things that were mistakes.
Oh, that's really hard. That's brutal, in fact. It's the political mystery voice bit. Don't call in. There is no prize. You can message 87222. Here's the voice again.
Things that were mistakes.
That's going to run. If somebody gets that today, I will honestly eat my own elbows live on air. 87222. We'll give you the answer if we get a right answer on the other side of the news. If we don't, it rolls over to Monday. Here it is one more time.
Things that were mistakes.
Who's that? 03444991000. Don't call in on that, by the way. But you can message 87222. Kim is in Leicester. What have you got for us, Kim? Hello.
Hi, Ian. I'm sort of responding to your question about was Brexit a success.
Yeah.
I think there seems to be a lot of confusion. The reason for Brexiting was very well defined in David Cameron's Charterhouse speech. It applied to the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, and basically he defined a clean break from the four major European institutions. That's the European Court of Justice, the Customs Union. We would leave the single market in its entirety, and we would give up freedom of movement. So that no longer happened.
Okay.
Which obviously that would have a significant effect on our ability to control immigration.
Yeah.
And what that would give us, and this is all well defined, as I say, in his Charterhouse speech, of which I have a copy. I printed it out at the time to be sure of what I was voting for. That would give us control back of our borders, our money, our laws. We would get our fishing rights back. We would essentially become a self-determining sovereign nation state once again, with the freedom of self-determination. The thing that stumped it all was when Malthouse came along with his Malthouse Amendment and took no deal off the table. David Cameron was quite clear that we would leave entirely with a clean break. And that's, in that sense, I mean, Brexit has been successful because we've got that control back. But the fact that we had to have a deal because the powers that be decided in their almighty wisdom that we would not leave with a clean break, that kind of stumped us quite a lot, and they've done absolutely nothing since, in my opinion.
Yeah, maybe that was the idea all along, Kim, to create some confusion. Everyone go, oh no, it's all gone madly wrong, we've got to go back. I think Keir Starmer is hoping for some of that, maybe. Kim, thank you very much indeed. That's Kim in Leicester. More comment from you on the way. There's a whole load of stuff to get through in the next hour. We've got a brand new Voice of Doom. I predict this one's going to go for about 7 weeks. I can't imagine anyone knowing whose voice this is.
Things that were mistakes.
Can we hear that one more time?
Things that were mistakes.
See, now I'm hearing it, I'm thinking, oh no, it's going to go in a minute, isn't it? Someone's going to get it right. You never let us down on this one. Stand by. Will we get an answer? Find out on the other side of the news. We'll keep the phone lines open on that question. Has Brexit been a success? Right now, 3 o'clock. Let's get the latest news headlines.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Three minutes after 3 o'clock, you're welcome back to the home of Common Sense. It's Brexit Day. Well, sort of. 5 years since the UK left the EU. Keir Starmer has refused to mark the occasion. Meanwhile, Nigel Farage has said if he was Prime Minister, he would give the 17.4 million people who voted Brexit the Brexit they asked for, which thus far we haven't quite got. We'll have more of your response on that. Has it been a success? Your views and thoughts. Also this afternoon, prison recalls have risen by more than 40% following the introduction of the early release scheme. This sparking fears of a new overcrowding crisis as Labour continues releasing offenders after they've served less than half of their sentence. Imagine being let out and then go, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and commit another crime. Back you go to Sea Wing. Strange times, and road collisions in Wales are at a record low following the introduction of the mandatory 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, despite drivers calling the move an absolute nightmare. But is it down to that, or are there other reasons? Details on the way. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. Let's do the voice of doom then. So the mystery political voice. Here's the voice again we played you.
Things that were mistakes.
Who is that? Some of the wrong answers. Malcolm Rifkind. No. Geoffrey Howe, no. Louise Casey, no. Gordon Brown, it is not. Nor it is Peter Hitchin, Tobias Elwood. It's not Samuel Jackson. It's not Samuel L. Jackson, no. Kwasi Kwarteng, it is not. Have another listen.
Things that were mistakes.
We didn't get a right answer, which means it rolls over to Monday. Hurrah all round. Ponder that one over the weekend. It'll be back at about 2:45 on Monday afternoon. 3:05 now. Now, the number of ex-prisoners sent back to jail has jumped by 40% after thousands were released early in order to ease overcrowding. The Ministry of Justice figures show nearly 10,000 offenders were recalled in the space of 42% more than the same time last year. The rise follows early release schemes introduced by both the previous Conservative government and the current Labour government. Let's speak with Tom Wheatley, President of the Prison Governors Association. Afternoon to you, Tom.
Good afternoon, Ian.
It's always an interesting one, this, isn't it? There's many people, as you know better than I, that shouldn't be in jail at all. It's the wrong form of punishment for many. However, it is the system we have. You've got to be very careful if you release people early. And one of the things you want to be sure about, of course, is that they're not going to reoffend. Apparently 40% did and came back again.
I don't think this is all reoffending, Ian. So that people are recalled for all sorts of reasons.
Or some sort of breach, maybe, right?
Yeah, some of them are reasons of compliance. They don't keep appointments. A lot of it's about having somewhere to live that you can, permanently live in. So I think of the number that were recalled to custody, about 25%-ish of those had some further charges. So there was reoffending, but that reoffending, it wasn't all reoffending.
Yeah, got it. In terms of the numbers, is that up there with the usual reoffending rate?
So the recall rate has been increasing, and it's been increasing month on month, quarter on quarter for quite some time. The reason that this number is so high, so significantly higher than the same quarter last year, is because of those early release schemes. We released a load of extra people early, who would have been released later on. They came out all in a bunch, and that's why this quarter has seen that significant increase in the number of recalls.
So an outsider like me would say, well, clearly we either released the wrong people or we released people with the wrong circumstances, to be generous. Is it a combination of all of that?
Of course, it will be a combination of all of that. This early release scheme was not a release scheme that was about how to best release people into the community, how to give them the best chance. This was about freeing up prison population, because at that time prisons were absolutely on the edge. They were completely full. The government didn't really have a lot of choice about what to do about it. This is what they did. This is what you might argue, almost inevitable result of that is. that if you release people without proper places to go, without jobs, without things that are going to tie them back into their communities, then many of them fall back into what they're used to, which is committing crime.
Yeah. I always have sympathy with you guys in the prison world because I'm sure there's lots of things that you sit there staring at your TV or your radio, listening to announcements from politicians, thinking, have you ever been in a prison? Do you know how this thing actually works? And it's so often the case, and this happens across industries, Tom, where nobody asks those that work at the coalface of the problem how to ease the problem. And I know there are meetings and, you know, ministers come in from time to time and you guys go and meet ministers from time to time, but it does seem there's something much bigger that needs to be done here. Rather tinkering around the edges, releasing a few people here and there cannot be the long-term answer.
I mean, where we got to was we got to a stage where the number of people that the courts were sending to prison, so that's as a result of the laws that we've made in this country, that's as a result of changes that we've made, was massively exceeding the number of places we had. And those places come from the amount of investment there is in our justice system. So prison spaces are really expensive. And the public really have to make a choice between, do you want lots of people to spend a lot of time in prison because you think that makes you safer and pay for it?
Yeah.
Or do you want to spend your money on other things like health and education and policing and have people sent to prison for less time? Where we are at the moment is somewhere in the middle, where there's a real thirst to use custody, but not a preparation to pay for it.
Yeah. And of course, there's a lot of politics in this as well, isn't there? You know, politicians don't want to be seen to be light on crime, but simultaneously haven't really got many, it seems to me, you know, Tories, Labour, whoever it happens to be, don't seem to have many solutions. I said at the beginning, Tom, there's loads of people that probably should never be in prison, but that becomes a politically sensitive area, doesn't it? Who do you know, is it fraudsters because they're not going to rob you or, you know, be violent towards you, but simultaneously, well, it's not fair that just because you're a bit rich and, you know, ripped off the tax man or something similar, therefore you don't get punished as well. It's a very, very difficult balancing act.
It is absolutely a balancing act, and it goes right to the heart of what sending people to, what punishment is about. If punishment is about just retribution on behalf of society, you've done something that has harmed society and this is what you're going to get for it. It's a direct retributive punishment for that. If that's what it's about, then, you know, we can deliver some of that. If it's about making people less likely to offend, then our ability to do that in prisons that are underfunded and overcrowded is massively reduced. There's also the idea of deterrent. So how much does, you know, a long prison sentence form a deterrent for somebody? And those arguments are all more complicated than you would think, because I've talked to lots of prisoners. I've spent 30 years working in prisons, and I've asked the question that said, you know, if instead of getting 5 years for what you did, you knew you were going to get 10, would it have made any difference? And the answer is very usually no, because they weren't thinking as far as the next 10 minutes, let alone the next 10
and
years.
No one commits a crime thinking they're going to get caught, right?
Exactly. So we can overstate the deterrent factor of long prison sentences. And you're right, politicians have often wanted to be seen as being tough on crime, when that used to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime.
Yeah.
And the causes of crime are things like, you know, lack of housing, inequality, lack of social cohesion, all of those things, lack of provision of treatment programs for people with substance misuse problems, with mental health issues in our communities before they ever come into contact with criminal justice.
Yeah. Did you think when you started in this world, Tom, when you were maybe a little wet behind the ears back in the day, as we all were at some point, and you looked at the problems, some of these problems were there then, maybe not on such a big scale. Did you ever think 3 decades later it would have all got worse? Because the usual journey that you hope for is that, you know, any areas where there's obvious demonstrable problems, at some point in the future, someone will make it better.
Yeah, I think in my career, so I started in 94, and for many years things were getting better and they felt like they were getting better. And then the thing that came along was austerity. And at the point we hit austerity, justice being a non-protected department, we bore the brunt with others of cuts that had to be made to public services because we weren't producing enough tax income. That's when it started to go downhill. And once it starts to go downhill in a real people-focused business like prisons, it's very, very, very difficult to turn that around.
Yeah.
So, my worry is that the longer this goes on, the more difficult it will be for us to turn the tanker.
Yeah, I sense we'll probably speak in a couple of years' time, Tom, and we'll maybe just have the same conversation. In fact, neither of us should just turn up. We'll just replay this interview and do it that way, perhaps. Tom, great to have you on. Thank you. Tom Wheatley is the president of the Prison and Governors Association with us here on Talk. I've still never worked out. I'm going to come back to the ankle tag, which I'm sure is the best friend to the solution of some of the problems. And I have no idea why there's many people that would obviously, if you said, right, you're going to go to prison or you're going to be curfewed and tagged at home. So think about the white-collar crime. Think about those people that aren't necessarily violent. Most would go, yep, I'd rather be at home on a curfew than in a prison on a curfew. But if you were on that curfew for longer at home than you would have got in prison, there's going to be that will feel like a punishment. It'd be like lockdown all over again. Right, here's a tag. You're allowed out for half an hour a day. If you breach that, you are going to jail, but you're going to go to jail for far longer than you might have done. And in the meantime, you're going to stay indoors for the next 3 years. You can see how I can see that's a punishment for people. That would become a punishment, but we don't, for some reason, utilise it. And in an era where technology is man alive, you can buy air tags for your phone and for your goods, and you can, we've got CCTV, AI and everything. And when we can't somehow find another way for those that shouldn't be in Nick, I reckon there's probably 30% of people you could not have in prison and have an alternative punishment. I'm no expert in it, but just thinking aloud, I'm sure there's something in the tag and curfew thing. Let's go to Nick, who's down in London. Back to that issue of Brexit. Nick, what are you thinking? Afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Ian. Yes. What I'm thinking is I get very frustrated, I have to say,
yes,
when I hear people ask the question, has Brexit been a success? Because, frankly, that's a very silly question. Because Brexit is just a tool. Brexit is a synonym for freedom. And the question is, what do you do with that freedom? What do you do with the tool of Brexit, which allows you to then do what you want? So the question isn't, has Brexit been a success? But have politicians made a success of Brexit? Have they used Brexit in a successful way? That's the question. Brexit can't be successful or unsuccessful. It's just a tool. It's like a hammer. A hammer isn't successful. A hammer isn't unsuccessful. If you use the hammer to put a nail in, that's successful. If you use the hammer and smash your thumb, that's unsuccessful. But it's not the hammer's fault. You see what I'm saying? So Brexit is just a tool. It gave us the freedom to do what we then wanted to do. And the question then is, have politicians, and we have to say conservative politicians because they were in charge, did the Tories make a success of Brexit? Now, clearly, the answer is no. I mean, some things have been positive. We've saved £66 billion that we would otherwise have paid in EU contributions. Now, if you think of the fuss that Rachel from accounts has been making about this purported 22 billion black hole, which wasn't a black hole because she saw the books before she took over, so that's a lie for a start. But anyway, the point is she's made such a fuss about, we've got 22 billion, we've got to plug this hole. Imagine if it was 66 billion. So the point is we have saved £66 billion in contributions. But the point is that we could have done a lot more. We could have used those freedoms to actually, for instance, reduce regulations. And who failed to do that? It was Kemi Badenoch. She was the minister responsible, and she stopped the legislation to eliminate EU regulations. So the idea that Conservatives are ever going to change anything or ever use Brexit correctly is for the birds. So no, our politicians haven't taken advantage of Brexit as they should have done. But we are now free, and that freedom will continue. And so what we've got to hope is that in the future we're going to have some politicians who will make use of Brexit. And the only one who comes to mind, obviously, is Nigel Farage and the Reform Party. And it does look like, they're moving up in the polls. So hopefully at the next election they will win. And finally, Britain will be able to make use of this wonderful tool of Brexit this wonderful freedom that we've been given to actually benefit Britain.
And make it work. Nick, thank you very much indeed. That's a very thorough stuff from Nick, despite speaking to us on a 1987 walkie-talkie from Millets. Probably bought on eBay. Thank you, Nick, for that. One from Daisy in Newport who says, what would the Brexit people voted for look like? In what way would my life be different if we had that Brexit? All I know is that I'd planned to retire in Spain or France, and now I can't. That's definitely a penalty of Brexit. Yet to see or even hear what the benefits of Brexit are, says Daisy. Well, that is the balancing act, right? The balancing act between democracy, where you may not fiscally or visually see a specific benefit in kind of tangible terms, which I think is what Daisy, not unreasonably, is asking for, versus living in a country where you can say you are autonomous and truly democratic and away from a bigger bureaucracy that pulls the strings. That would be the benefit, even if it doesn't help the retirement home in Spain, which of course you can still do, but I think to get there is a little more complex these days. If you've got the right money, they might even give you a citizenship thrown in as well, although I think the new government of Spain are trying to do away with that. But I get it. Daisy, thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. This is Talk.
I think the problem now for people like Nigel Farage, it seems that reset moment that Keir Starmer is talking about getting closer ties to Brussels is just going to bring us closer and closer. So I think people from Nigel Farage's side of the argument are just going to see that maybe the next few months and years as a betrayal of what happened back in 2016.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This from Elsa, who says, if you've ever driven on the Luxembourg-Brussels highway on a Thursday, there's a there's a continuous procession of luxury vehicles pounding the motorway between Strasbourg and Brussels and back again every couple of weeks. Would British taxpayers think that is a good use of the billions the EU takes in taxes? Many of these vehicles are chauffeur-driven, carrying paperwork while ministers fly or go by train, first class, of course. Not to mention the luxurious benefits, meals and services they make. The House of Commons and the House of Lords look like refuges for the homeless. Yes, I mean, I haven't seen it, but I'm painfully aware of it, having reported on it many times. Thank you, Elsa, for that. It's a brilliant description of what happens. I don't know the reason. I think the reason was that way France got a little bit of, they could say, well, the Parliament's in France as well as, in Belgium. Is it that? Why on earth would you... I mean, literally filing cabinets worth of papers taken from one office, put on, as Elsa says, on the highway between Luxembourg and Brussels, and away they go. I mean, man alive. What the heck is going on? 0344 499 1000. This will be Harry in Portsmouth. How are you doing, Harry?
Oh, not bad, thank you, Ian. Nice programme, churning all the Brexit stuff all over again, 5 years down the line.
It's back again, right, for another visit. Yeah. What are you thinking?
Well, you just mentioned that that switch where they go from Parliament to Parliament. I have a funny feeling Charles de Gaulle may have been involved, but I can't remember whether he was involved in the 57 agreement, 1957 EU agreement.
That would make perfect sense.
It was his style, wasn't it, to insist that France must not be sidelined.
Do you know what? I think that's probably the answer. I reckon it's as simple as that. And you wouldn't think, the wishes of some... Well, it's all very well saying it, isn't it? We don't want to be sidelined. I don't think even he had in mind that we're going to build a massive parliament and transport one to the other every 2 weeks.
No, it wouldn't. It would have been an A4 box file in those days.
Yeah.
Going on about how this all started, because it was back in the 70s. All we thought of was it was a common market, the European Economic Community, and then later on, Major signed us up in '92 to become part of the European Union. It had all been trotted out, in the background, but most of us were unaware of it. And I thought, oh, great, it will make me easy to buy a nice little cottage in France if I ever wanted to. I never did, of course, but it would have been nice, but that wouldn't have changed my mind on the way it was going.
That was sort of Maastricht Treaty territory, wasn't it?
That's
when
it. Yeah,
Major was monkeying around.
The Maastricht rebels, they caved in because I think that was the time when Major was saying "back me or sack me" type of thing, They caved in because they wanted to save their party rather than their country,
What was it that people like John Major, who still argues this to this day, but what is their kind of almost unhealthy attraction to being, at the centre of this incredibly large, ever-growing thing called the EU? Is it just, do they genuinely think, no, life is better if you're part of this? I get it on the trade stuff, but there's enough other stuff. We just mentioned things like buildings and parliament. I mean, surely those guys must be able to go, this is a bit mad. It's a bit big, this thing.
Well, of course, he was in the Thatcher cabinet, and he obviously followed the view of Thatcher at the time that it was just a trading arrangement. And it was later on in the sort of late 80s when Thatcher said, like, no, in her speech, where she finally... the penny had dropped that it was a political union. And a couple of years later, Major's the PM, and he's quite content. They're internationalists with that trade angle. They can always sell it, that if we're in there, that's what Hezza does. We'll trade harder and faster and firmer than those European lot. We'll outsmart them. We're ex-empire types almost. They were trying to build a version, it took the place of the empire and even the Commonwealth.
Sure.
They thought, we'll bat for Britain, and we'll obviously have a bigger bat than the Germans and the French, but we never have had because they always gang up together.
Yeah. Interesting, and I don't think that kind of mentality is ever likely to disappear, frankly. I think that's kind of there forever. Listen, great call. Harry, thank you. Harry in Portsmouth. Neil is in West Yorkshire. What have you got for us, Neil? Hi.
Hello, Ian. Yeah, I think, as you said earlier on, it's going to take a long time before we can really judge Brexit. We can only judge Brexit when it happens, and it hasn't happened yet. Two of the reasons are, of course, the COVID came along, and all the governments around the world and in Europe went into panic mode and closed down the economy, with all those numerous lockdowns that caused so much damage to our health and our wealth.
Sure.
And then, of course, I voted for Brexit, fully expecting those unelected bureaucrats and Eurocrats in Brussels to punish us, to cut off their noses despite their faces. I didn't expect our own politicians to punish us. And that's why I feel betrayed by our politicians.
What is... do you blame any one party for this? Because people tend to forget, it's all very well the Tories kind of playing this kind of, we're sort of Brexit light characters, but of course it was the Conservative government that campaigned against it.
Yes, David Cameron only called the referendum because he thought that we would vote to stay in.
Yeah.
None of the politicians wanted it because they were all signed up to the European project.
Sure.
But sadly for them, the British people weren't. And I do believe if the Brexit vote happened again, apparently a lot of people would change and vote to go back in. I'm not so sure that would happen because I think a lot of people like me would. We can't say it's been a roaring success, but it hasn't been a huge failure either. When you look at Europe, I mean, Germany's in their third year of financial recession.
Yeah.
And I would vote again to come out and stay out.
Because it does make you wonder when you see, other economies, Germany, who are the kind of the undoubted powerhouse of Europe, right? I mean, huge on everything from making motor cars to all manner of other areas of massive global influence, and they've been relegated. They are currently the sort of the Southampton of the Premier League. They're having, a torrid time. I thought that wasn't meant to happen in the EU super dream, Neil.
Well, exactly. So they're not as strong and competent as the Europhiles would like to suggest.
Yeah. Spot on. Neil, thank you. Neil in West Yorkshire. 0344 499 1000. Lash says, I voted Remain. The reason being, I don't think we should ever have been given the choice. On the whole, the country were not informed enough to make a rational choice, and it was inevitably going to end up being an emotional decision. However, the vote was cast and the decision was made. And with the current backdrop, we absolutely need to stay out and make the most of this opportunity. To put it simply, oi, government, do as you're told, you wazzocks, and stop squirming around. You have your instructions. Spot on. There's something in that. It was a complicated question. The girl that cuts my hair said to me that at the time. She goes, why are they asking me? How the hell would I know whether we're meant to leave or stay? And trading agreements and all manner of other business commercial considerations. I haven't got a clue, she said. Well, reasonable point. 0344 499 1000.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 0344 499 1000. We continue in just a couple of moments' time. We're going to be talking, in fact, just before we go back to the calls, we're going to be talking about speed limits in Wales and what the heck has gone on there. Is it a good thing they've reduced it to 20 miles an hour? Man alive. This one comes in from Derek, who says the UK produces less than 1% of the world's CO2s. Chopping down our forests that produce oxygen, O2, to build foreign windmills that last 5 years is brainless. Plant more trees, says Derek. One here from Simon in Berkshire. The exhibition, this is the exhibition in Parliament we talked about earlier that was banned by Parliament. It was all about the Jewish story and the Holocaust, and it was very sensitive, very powerful. They said it was too political to show in Westminster Hall. Simon says the exhibition, you would have thought that the Prime Minister as leader would step in and overrule. Still loves a committee more than history, it seems. This from John. I think that leaving the EU has shown that the civil service have successfully made a Brexit failure. And one here with no name given says politicians are set on remaining. It's been set up to fail, hoping one day we will vote again. And when your guest said we have sold 1 million less cars, that's not because of Brexit. That's his beloved EU making people buy electric cars we don't want. That's why car sales have fallen, not because of Brexit. Dave says, you'll remember there's an old saying called there's no such thing as a free lunch. All the benefit fraudsters and those living off benefits when they don't need to obviously don't believe in it or its principle. Unfortunately, those paying for their free lunches are the working and taxpayers like me, a pensioner that still pays tax for them to freeload from. Enough is enough. I think I might have read that one before. But by the way, Dave in Bristol, it's worth reading again. Thank you for that. Welsh roads have recorded their lowest number of collisions since it began enforcing the slower 20-mile-an-hour speed limits almost 2 years ago. Drivers called this an absolute nightmare. I called it an absolute nightmare. It seemed a political thing for the net zero evangelists or the health and safety massive. 100 fewer people have been killed or seriously injured since the introduction, prompting calls from the Scottish Green Party to adopt the same policy in Scotland. Have we all been moaning unnecessarily? Should we just fess up that 20 mile an hour not only works, it saves lives, kids? Let's speak with Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK, who regularly helps us out on these kind of things. Afternoon to you, Howard.
Hello, Ian. How are you, my friend?
Good as gold. You and I have talked about this many, many times on air, over a pint, you name it, 20 miles an hour. What's going on with this? Now we learn it's the answer to saving lives. What's not to like?
I'm sorry, I can't believe all those figures, etc. I'd like to look at the detail of that and how it's affected and where those lives have been saved. If they were sensible outside schools and hospitals, which I've always believed 20 mile an hour is a good idea.
Yep.
But a car going slowly at this speed produces greater emissions. So when you see the Green Party, promoting this and it's going to create more emissions, it doesn't stack up, does it?
Well, it doesn't really stack up, does it? But what if the truth is that actually it does save lives? Are we therefore forced to concede that, look, if you drive slower, you're not going to hurt someone. So you and me have got to shut up and vote for the future, Howard.
Yeah, I take your point. I'm all for safe driving, but I think the most important thing is exactly that, safe driving. A study by Queen's University, Belfast, last year showed that while speed limits reduce traffic, they do little to stop accidents. It's about dangerous driving. You can do dangerous driving at 5 mile an hour, those sorts of things. My point is simple as this. 20 mile an hour is too low in most of the areas and most of the decent roads. I mean, I drive regularly in London, and I'm just past your studios recently. I drove past London Bridge. I got overtaken by bicycles. I was doing 18 mile an hour in the 20 mile an hour. I was overtaken by, and scooters, electric scooters.
Outrageous.
I know. And as you know, I'm a big boy racer, mate. At 70 years of age, you know what I'm like.
Yeah.
But But the point is, if this really is true, then obviously there'd be more support for it. But I just don't believe their figures.
To me, it seemed, I don't want to be too cynical here, but it just seemed a bit too convenient, if that's the right word.
I think you're right, Ian. I think you've hit the nail on the head. This is all very political. It's another cash-grabbing opportunity again, and they're trying to justify these sorts of things. Let's look at our roads properly. We need safe roads, but I see people looking at their smartphones crossing the roads. Yeah. Those sorts of things are happening. It's not just the boring old driver, already the highest tax driver in the world.
Where do you think this is likely to go? Because, this incursion of 20-mile-an-hour zones is all over the place. The road I live in is now 20 miles an hour. I didn't even realise that until about apparently half a year after it was done. But the neck of the woods, Sevenoaks and Tunbridge Wells, these kind of areas, you look around, town set 20 miles an hour, you name it. Is this? It seems to me that councillors and highways departments kind of almost dine out on their credentials of goodness. We're a better person because it's 20 miles an hour. And that seems to be where the logic starts and stops.
Well, I find it extraordinary because, I know where you live and you probably know where I live. I live further down in Cranbrook area. And I drive in these country lanes, which you can only get one car by. And you've got a sign that says de-restricted, which means you can do 60 mile an hour on it. Yeah. So I think really all our roads need to be reassessed for basically what they're fit for purpose and whether they're safe. If they can be 30, let them be 30. If they can be 40, 50, etc. Yeah. All I'm saying about it is I just don't believe these figures. And you said it yourself. I think it's pretty convenient at this time.
A couple of other stories here that are worth having a look at while you're with us, Howard. Speeding fines for drivers on the A20 near Sidcup could be voided due to small signs. I'm all for somebody who, found themselves on the positive end of a speeding ticket when they realised it wasn't valid because the signs didn't work properly.
Well, this is a bit spooky for me because I know that road pretty well, and I'm pleased I've got a clean licence, but about 6 months ago, I was driving down that said road, and I was listening on my phone, hands free, by the way, please, before people shout at me. And I was talking, and I just joined the road there, and it used to be 50 or 60, I can't remember now, and it suddenly dropped to 40 now, and I didn't see a sign. And that's the point. And my sat-nav hadn't caught up with the speed thing. Yeah. And I got a letter. I was doing 44, 46 in a 40-mile-an-hour zone, which I thought was 50. Yeah. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I thought, oh dear, and I've just been renewing my insurance, Ian, and I checked my points on the DVLL site, and I've got no points. And I thought, hey?
Wow.
Well, what happened there? Did they void it because of this small signage thing?
Yeah.
As you know, I've been working quite closely with a guy called Noel Wilcox, who's actually been challenging Sadiq Khan and TfL regarding the accuracy of signs in terms of ULEZ and LEZ type signs. So they don't tell you you've got to pay and those sorts of things. Our signage is either overdone or you can't see it.
Sure.
Those are the sorts of things. So, yes, I'm looking forward to see the outcome of this one.
Yeah, 60,000 drivers, apparently, fined for speeding in the affected area during a 12-month period. Temporary signs installed by our friends Transport for London were claimed to be too small. So I like it when the little man, who probably the average person was not a mad speeder, they just dipped over the kind of limit for whatever reason, and you're crushed with a fine and points. And apparently it was not a loophole that means thousands could be let off the hook. I'm all for that. We had a couple of emails come in, or a couple of messages come in saying, Howard, when are you getting back to politics? Are you getting back in at some point, Howard? What's the story there? If you can't talk about it, that's fine. I'm just relaying what a lot of our supporters of you are saying.
It's very kind of them to say that. All avenues are still open, but I don't think I can go back to reform, which is a shame because I believe in reform's policies. But unfortunately, I don't like the way that I was basically asked not to talk about Tommy Robinson, and those are the sorts of things. The Tommy Robinson rally tomorrow. I'm actually speaking at it. It doesn't mean to say I'm supporting him, and his bad past, which everyone says, but I do support him highlighting these rape gangs right across the country, and Elon Musk agrees with that. It's just a simple point of view. But I was told if I didn't actually stop talking about it, I'll be expelled from the party. So I got out before I was expelled. So, which is sad, considering I stood as London mayor and also came second down in Dover with 23% of the vote.
I was going to say that was a close call.
It was.
Squeaky anyway, bum time for Labour. But I'm bound to ask you as well, Howard, that of course today is Brexit Day. It's 5 years since Brexit. Nigel Farage has said, look, if reform were in, you'd get the proper Brexit. Have you always felt that what we've got at the moment is not the Brexit that you and others campaign for?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, I don't think it is yet. I mean, we're nearly there, but we keep hearing we're gradually sort of edging ourselves closer, aren't we? And, the European Court of Human Rights, that particular thing, we can't do anything. We might have less immigration if we could actually throw people out with actually being referred to, in terms of judges dictating what happens. I see it time and time again. The point is, yes, we haven't got 100% Brexit, and I do believe that Nigel and the gang could actually make it happen. And I hope, Reform UK gets elected in 2029. Hopefully it's sooner. And I will be backing and supporting them. But
and you think Nigel could deliver that Brexit?
Yes, I do. I mean, look, Nigel Trump is Nigel Trump. That's a Freudian slip, isn't it?
Listen, we both know Nigel well. He'll be fine with that.
Yeah, he will indeed. Well, Donald Trump's already deporting people. He's deporting people that in university campuses who are on Palestinian protests and those sorts of things. All sorts of thinking. It can be done if you have the will to do it. And unfortunately, Labour and certainly the Tories in the last 14 years didn't have that will. So, yeah, I believe it can be done.
Yeah, spot on. Listen, Howard, we must catch up again soon, of course. Great to have you on. He's Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, on a variety of issues there. Thank you to him. It's 4:45. One here from Simon. Good to hear old man Harrison. Harrison was, of course, Simon sent that a couple of hours ago. Harrison Allman-Varty, who was our first guest, and somewhat ironically, Simon says old man Harrison. He's 19. One of the youngest councillors in the country, a Reform UK councillor. He was Tory, and then a month or so ago he hopped over the fence and became Reform. I want to know your thoughts on this, please. Starmer's endgame is to rejoin the EU. As he knows, the only chance he has of being elected for a second term will be to offer a fresh referendum on rejoining. That's going to be the curveball that sucks the oxygen out of the political debate. Brexit too will be the battleground for the next election. There is a reason the government is happy to continue to show polls in favour of joining, says Simon. I'd never really thought of that before, but thank you, Simon, for that, because it does, you can kind of see it almost. I mean, if the economy is, ultimately the economy has got to be, for Starmer to win again, it's got to be in buoyant shape, right? So everything that we've seen happen, I know some of it happened before he got the job, but, it's not looking good. Rachel from Accounts is not doing the best job. She's got to be gone. She's got to be history very soon. They need a fresh pair of eyes on the books. And I think the public need to see new faces that aren't so associated with the carnage of the first 6 months in office. I've never seen anything like it. Remember when Blair came in back in the day, it was like even if you didn't support the guy or vote for him, it was like, well, this place is a good place to be. It's all kicking off. You got Blur, Oasis, the sun is shining, it's a great summer. Yeah, we're on the up. It was the kind of thing that Trump's been talking about, the new beginning, if you like, a new era has been born. And it felt like this lot has been nothing like that. So will Starmer's only option be to say we're going to have another in-out referendum on Brexit, thinking that there's enough people that will vote for it? Well, it would be a massive risk if he gave it a go. But as Simon in Devon says, it might well be his only option come that time. 0344 499 1000. Peter Cargwell's going to be here with, I think it's Peter today, isn't it, Peter Cargwell? With Drive at 4 o'clock this afternoon. He's going to nip in before then to tell us what exactly is going on. I want more comment from you as well. We'll go back to your calls, comments and messages in just a few moments' time. Just gone 4:45. This is Talk.
a court order, isn't it, that's been issued because of the coverage that you have done in Ukraine. And knowing you as I do, I imagine you probably won't affect you at all. You'll just continue to do what you've always done.
You cannot see this move by the Russian court as anything but an attempt to intimidate journalists like me who report on the conflict. And as a matter of principle, I will not be cowed, and I will go back to Ukraine, certainly, and I will continue to report on this war.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
One in from Chris this afternoon. I'm glad I voted Leave, and the only thing I will change about Brexit is I'm voting Reform, as all the rest want us to go back. Well, they can want us to go back anyway. They can. Tory full of liars, a Labour a total waste of space, Libs not worth anything. So it's Reform, and also I have never met anyone who voted Leave change their minds at all. It's a good point, actually. I've met, or certainly through this show, spoken to lots of Remainers who have changed their mind, but you don't often meet Leavers. And the kind of curious way that the kind of Leave, the Remain argument will go on TV and radio and talk as if it is fact that it's been a failure. Well, it's obviously been a failure, so we can now establish that. Let's get into the discussion. Well, hang on a second. But what are you judging that by? So if the economy takes a tumble, that's down to Brexit. Well, by your own logic, if things grow, that would have to be down to Brexit. But that doesn't quite work out in that way in the heady world of confirmation bias and nut jobbery, of which there is a lot out there. How's that going, eh? Oh, that Brexit thing, yeah, it's brilliant, right? Well, so everything that's wrong is down to that, right? It's pandemic, nothing to do with that. Global turn down, nothing to do with that. Interest rates, nothing to do with... Really? It's all... Yeah. I mean, that really is a mucked up kind of thinking. This will be Andrew in Hertfordshire. What have you got for us, Andrew? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. You're doing very well on a very, very happy day. The reality of the Brexit is it went well. It went as well as it could possibly have gone thus far. You have to be realistic. If you look at what it showed us that actually, if we acted like Trump, putting America first, and you were very good earlier on, if we'd have said Northern Ireland is actually part of Great Britain and that's the end of it, and if we were able to seize, as the gentleman said earlier, the benefits of the fishing, we just say to the French, it's very straightforward, because of the migration across by boats, your fishermen pose a huge threat to these people. Therefore, we have to suspend your licenses until that ends. We'll pay you whatever you would have got. It's no problems at all. And by the way, when your fishermen have got some time on their hands, they could pop up to Calais and have a chat with the Care for Calais people, hand out some soup.
That's what you need to do, isn't it? It's always go on the soup run. That'll be a leveller.
The reality is it was never going to be immediate. We have great opportunity in front of us. But, you know, Trump and also Dominic Cummings, they talked about the blob. You think of all those civil servants who've conspired, like the MPs, to try and drag this through the mud. So it's not been easy. If everybody had got behind it and worked with it, it would have been different. But that's people. You can't actually take them with you. And, you know, unfortunately, it was a statement. We want to leave. But the politicians wouldn't deliver it.
And I thought that was the most extraordinary thing, squabbling away, trying to look for little gaps in the kind of statute books or some kind of reason why it can't go ahead, and all of these tests and debates and all the rest of it. And as you say, if they'd have spent all of that time going, right, OK, this is the vote, British people have voted, it was fair, it was democratic, both sides said what they had to say, some of the campaigning was good, some of it was a bit iffy on both sides, but this is the vote. Let's all get together and make it work. Wouldn't that have been a great motivator for our country, Andrew?
It would have shown it that we're a democracy. And if you look at Henry VIII and the problem he had with that, if you look at Boris and Oliver Letwin just acted like a traitor. And of course, part of his Guy Fawkes team was the Speaker. If you look at what they did to try and stop it, and there's a lot of hatred towards Boris Johnson. That is what it is. But actually, he was hamstrung by some really evil people who hate Britain and hate democracy.
And I don't know why. You had people like Dominic. What was his name? Not Dominic Cummings, not Dominic Raab, who was the former Attorney General that was on everything, still trying to get it to reverse it. Name escapes me, probably not Dominic after all of that. But you had these characters. Then you had people like Damien Green, who, former Deputy Prime Minister, Andrew, as you'll remember. He was a Remainer, but the minute the vote went through, he said, I'm going to campaign for a successful Brexit. That's the kind of MP you wanted, right? Somebody who didn't necessarily vote for it themselves, but they acknowledged the democracy.
Yeah, and that's what we lost on that day. From that day, we got democracy, and the minute we had it in our hands, it was snatched away by people who looked down on us.
Yeah. Dominic Grieve was the name I was looking for. We will remember him. Andrew, thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew in Hertfordshire. How could I forget? Peter Cardwell is with us. How could I forget Dominic Grieve?
Mel Stride, never heard of her.
I said that about somebody once years ago on air, and it was an obvious, silly line. It wasn't meant to be some kind of fun. It wasn't some sort of trans sort of, huge satire of any sort. I just said it. I was inundated with people going, no, it's a woman. It's a woman. It's like, yeah, I know. I do know.
The one I did with that, when I worked with BBC a million years ago, there were 10 million people on a reply all about a thing in the fridge. Someone left their sandwich in the fridge, and people kept replying all, saying, oh, we'll get it a bit later at reply all. Oh, yes, that'll be really good. Yes, it started to smell. Da-da-da. It went on and on and on. And I hit reply all and said, I realise the irony of hitting reply all, but can we please stop hitting reply all? Because this goes to, hundreds of people. Yes. And then someone replied to me on reply all and went, well, you just hit reply all. It's like, stop.
I know that.
Stop the madness.
Stop it. When does it stop?
Never stops.
There's a Netflix show in that.
There is.
Absolutely. Called Reply All.
Called Reply All, yes, exactly.
That's a great title already. Let's write it, Peter.
I think we should.
I don't know who's going to be in it, but we'll...
I think you should be in it.
You think so?
Yeah, I think so. I think you'd be good.
I could
lead character, leading man.
I'll make that work. What is happening after 4 o'clock?
Well, we're talking more about Brexit. We're talking to Kate Hoey, Baroness Hoey, about it, and reflecting those new statistics and evidence from
Brexiteer.
That's right. Yeah, there were very few of them, but she was one of them. She's now an independent peer, but certainly the public doesn't seem to think that Brexit has worked.
I loved those. The bit I really liked in the Brexit campaign was when you saw politicians from other parties campaigning together.
Yes.
So we had, I'm trying to think, Senator Stewart as well was on the Brexit side.
Yes,
and
you had Ruth Davidson and Angela Eagle on the same side for Remain, and in fact one of the senior people in the Remain side, one of the press people, Ruth Davidson, who is a very direct person, sent him a message with her and Angela Eagle and said, are you sure you want two shovel-faced lesbians on the same side of this debate? Which I thought was
beautiful.
Yeah, pure Ruth Davidson.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant.
Absolutely. But they were great moments. And then, of course, the big Wembley blowout with Boris. Tomorrow will be your Independence Day.
That's it. And it was, and we'll be talking about how that worked or didn't work.
Yeah.
Also, 1 in every £15 in benefits, fraud and error. A tenth of farmland to be axed for net zero. We'll talk to Ashley Back. She's a fascinating woman. She's been campaigning for her cousin Agam Berger to be released. Agam has now been released yesterday, one of the Israeli hostages. Great news as well today that Keith Siegel, who is hopefully going to be released tomorrow. I've spoken to his wife a couple of times as well. We'll get a sports update, and we'll talk to Professor Sir John Curtis about all the political news as well, and also a pretty disturbing story.